Good morning. It's 9 a.m. and I'd like to call to order the April 5th, 2022 City Council meeting. Please call the roll.
Garza.
Here.
Fast.
Here.
Bagwell.
Here.
Richardson.
Here.
Carlos.
Here.
Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This morning's prayer will be given today by Daryl Peterson.
Good morning, everybody. Good time to pray, isn't it?
Yes.
Always is.
Dear Heavenly and most gracious Father, we come before you and we thank you, Father God, for the wisdom that you have. And Father, we lift up wisdom over this city, wisdom over the leadership. But Father, your word also says that we need to have understanding, knowing what the wisdom needs to be put together and how to do. And Father, we just thank you that we have a lot of good leadership in this community. And I just lift each and every person up in the departments. And Father, we just lift up America. We lift up the world, Father. And Father, we know that it's not too big for you, but Father, it's too big for us. And I lift up whatever all the negative is, and I come against every negative issue across the world today in Jesus' name. And I break the power of darkness. And Father, I just loosen the light of your gospel, the light of your word, and the light of your truth, that we see and we stand and we believe that, Father, this world is a mess, but I know that we can get it straightened out. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. Next item, please.
Item 4A, a proclamation for National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week.
All right, and I have a few people I think who will join me at the podium for this. Thank you so much for coming. Whereas emergencies can occur at any time that require police, fire, or emergency medical services, and when an emergency occurs, the prompt response of police officers, firefighters, and paramedics is critical to the protection of life and preservation of property. And whereas the safety of our police officers and firefighters is dependent upon the quality and accuracy of information obtained from citizens who telephone the Hutchinson Reno County Emergency Communications Center. And whereas public safety telecommunicators are the first and most critical contact our citizens have with emergency services, and are the single vital link for our police officers and firefighters by monitoring their activities by radio, providing them information and ensuring their safety. And whereas public safety telecommunicators of the Hutchinson Reno County Emergency Communications Center have contributed substantially to the apprehension of criminals, suppression of fires, and treatments of patients. And whereas each dispatcher has exhibited compassion, understanding, and professionalism during their performance of the job in the past year, now therefore, I, Jade Pyrus de Carvalho, Mayor of the City of Hutchinson, Kansas, do hereby proclaim the week of April 10 through April 16, 2022 as National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week in the City of Hutchinson, Kansas, in honor of the men and women whose diligence and professionalism keep our city and citizens safe. A very timely honor. Would you like to say a few words?
National Public Safety Telecommunicator Week was founded in 1981 and then became a presidential proclamation 6667 signed by Bill Clinton in 1994. And it recognizes the second week of April for all the complex work and all the dedication that these professionals provide to our nation. But I would really like to thank the council for recognizing us locally. I think that means a lot more to our telecommunicators, while being recognized nationally is nice. I think when they're recognized locally, it really lets them see that they're appreciated on a local level for the work that they do for our community and for our responders, and we thank you for that.
We do. Thank you.
Item 4B, a proclamation for Apollo 13 Day.
Ladies like to join? saw Michelle try to get out of it there.
I know, good job.
Yeah. Whereas the U.S. Apollo manned space program played an integral part in the story of our nation's history, helping humankind understand, explore, and wonder about the Earth and universe we inhabit. And whereas on April 13th, 1970, 2 days after launch and 200,000 miles away from Earth, an explosion in an oxygen tank aboard the Apollo 13 spacecraft turned the mission from one of exploration of the moon to one of survival for the 3 U.S. astronauts aboard the craft. And whereas the Apollo 13 mission proved to the world the U.S.'s ability to overcome life-threatening challenges through creative, intelligent solutions and unmatched teamwork. And whereas the authentic spacecraft from the mission, Odyssey, resides in Hutchinson, Kansas, at the Cosmosphere International Science Education Center and Space Museum. And whereas the Cosmosphere helps to increase the state and Hutchinson's economic prosperity through increased tourism. And whereas in April of 2022, the Apollo 13 mission celebrated its 52nd anniversary, and this milestone is honored across the globe and locally with numerous anniversary events. Now, therefore, I, Jade Pyrus de Carvalho, Mayor of the City of Hutchinson, Kansas, do hereby proclaim April 13th, 2022 as Apollo 13 Day. Would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Jade. Yes. I'm Mimi Meredith, and with me is Michelle McCartney from the Cosmosphere, and we are grateful for this proclamation, and we want to encourage all of you, if you're ever having a bad day and want to put it in perspective really quickly, just come to the Cosmosphere and look at some of the exhibits that tell the story of real triumph over adversity, and certainly the Apollo 13 is one of those, rich in teamwork and communication and some of the resilience that we need today. So thank you to the community for welcoming the Apollo 13 to Hutchinson, and remember that it's there for you to see anytime, free always, to the citizens of Reno County. Thank you.
I will remind everyone, in the spirit of space exploration, we do have a Dylan lecture series today at 10:30 at the Sports Arena with a Kansas native astronaut, if you'd like to attend that. Next item, please.
Item 5, oral communications from the audience.
Okay, this is the part of the meeting where we allow comments from the audience on items that are not on the agenda. We ask that you approach the podium, state your name and zip code, and limit your comments to 5 minutes, please.
I'm not going to pray again, okay? My name is Pastor Darrell Peterson. Live at 805 East Avenue B here in Hutch. And I just got something that's really heavy on me. And, you know, in the police department, we have, where we live, we have a lot of incidents that require police attendance. And they are so gracious to come and to do what they do. And one of the things that I just want to bring up is this, that the police officers that I am acquainted with, now I'm on their side, not against their side. But what happens is this, they come and they're so professional and they do everything to the T as far as I'm concerned. And then after a ticket is issued, it dies right there. It goes no further. And it's frustrating to me. And I'm just here to say that, and I'm not going to elaborate on it. But I just feel like that no matter if it's a fire department or police department, whatever, we need to lift up the officers, the firemen, all of these people for what they have to put up with sometimes. You know, they do their job, and what's the reward sometimes? They don't get nothing accomplished after it's done. And it's not their fault, but the buck gets passed onward. Thank you.
Thank you for that feedback. Are there others in the audience who would like to address the council?
Hi, my name's Phoebe Davenport, and I'm with Lavere Properties. Zip code would be 67501. the properties that I own in downtown Hutch. I came and spoke before the council in mid-February about an issue that we're having at one of our buildings on East 2nd, that's Leon Place, with an elevator. Our elevator has been very sporadically working for a number of months now, and the situation continues to deteriorate. Since the last time I was here, I got some information on what it would cost. Ooh, did I lose you? Can you hear me still? Okay. On the cost that might be associated with the modernization. And I did get a bid. I got a couple of bids, actually, from Bozen Elevator Solutions, who provides the service on our elevator currently, and then also from Otis, that they service our elevators at Plaza. The cost associated with the elevator specifically will be about $200,000, not including tax. If the city were to aid us with that, I'm not sure if, I think the city might be tax exempt from some of these kind of things. But excluded from that is about, I estimate, $50,000 worth of additional work with electrical work. We need an engineer on board, or an architect on board to make sure we're code compliant in other areas as well. And this modernization includes a number of different critical components. The biggest ticket item being the controller for the elevator, which is very dated, and we're having difficulty getting parts in order to service it. There's a part that we've been waiting on since the last time I presented here. It still hasn't shown up yet. We're hoping that it will come sometime in April. But given the diagnostics and the situations that have come since then, the elevator service company doesn't actually think that that component is really going to solve the issue. So we're waiting, but also not necessarily expecting that that's going to be the issue. So I'm coming to appeal to the counselors to assist us with this modernization. Total, like I said, I expect it to be somewhere in the range of $270, $275. Still getting some bids on the costs that are surrounding the modernization, like the electrical and things like that. The situation that we have right now, let me update you since the last time we were here. So we've had additional 5 tenants move out of the upper floors. So it's a 6-story building with 1 apartment up on the 7th floor. So the 4th through 7th floors are really very difficult to access right now. The elevator is working sporadically. Right now it's not working at all. We shut it down over the weekend and haven't been able to get it back online. So yeah, we had 5 move-outs since then from the upper floors. We've placed more tenants down below, so now the first 3 floors are about 90% occupied, and the top 3 floors are about 28% occupied. So it's becoming more of a crisis where the housing on the upper floors is really not accessible for tenants, and we're not able to place tenants on the 4th, 5th, or 6th floor of the building. So.
Okay, thank you.
I got a question for you.
Yes.
Is your elevator cable operated or is it hydraulic operated?
It is traction elevator.
Tractional. I would assume that'd be cable. I assume
It's got counterweights.
yes.
Yeah.
All right.
In the bid, it does say some of the things that are included in the upgrade. I mean, it specifies very clearly what's upgraded and what's not. And I know it mentioned about the counterweights,
Yes. Okay.
Yep.
Is that the whole elevator needs to be replaced or just the electrical and the hydraulic system?
but okay. Let me tell you what is included in that upgrade. It's a new drive, the new controller, new logic control system. They were going to look at just upgrading the controller, but as they got into it, that the manufacturers are not offering that model anymore, where you can just upgrade the controller. It doesn't then communicate with the other pieces of the equipment. So they have to update like all the buttons and things like that in order to work with the new controller. We have to put the new controller in a new location as well, because it's very, very cramped in the head house, and it's actually hazardous for the techs when they come out to work on it. It's in a head house that's tiny and hardly any space around it. So we're looking at another location that wouldn't be too far in order to move the new controller, but there's some costs associated with that as well. It's a new motor, new rope gripper, which is a safety thing, I understand. That is now part of the code. New door operators, new interlocks for the doors, new door protection device, nudging operation, which I think has to do with where it stops. New door restrictor angles. I don't know if this means anything to anyone. New counterweight rollers, new hoist ropes, which are, they said, showing signs of wear and most likely will need to be replaced soon. And a new pit switch. And then some new things in the car as well with the operating panel, like I mentioned about the buttons and things like that. New lighting, new position indicator, which is on the outside. New hall buttons, and then position indicator at the lobby level. And then there's a lot of things that are excluded from the bid too, like I mentioned, with the electrical and moving the controller to a new location.
Okay.
Phoebe, how many apartments would you say are inaccessible on those 3 floors?
The total apartments on the upper floors is 18 apartments. Right now, we have 5 of them occupied.
Okay.
So those tenants are there's actually one tenant on the 7th floor that's a little bit older, and she's moving out because of this. We have a woman who's pregnant on the 5th floor, and she's really struggling with the stairs as well. But yeah, all in all,
Okay.
we've got 5 apartments that are occupied.
Okay. I was just thinking that this somewhat aligns with the downtown development goal of increasing housing in the downtown area. So I'm wondering if it wouldn't be eligible for an incentives without walls loan. I'm not sure. Could you speak to that?
Not as eloquently as I would like to, but what I also think might be able to happen is in the ARPA discussion. Certainly there's a component of housing that relates to some of those funds. Depending upon how broad you expect that conversation to go, it could be that it might become eligible on certain portions of that.
Okay. And I will just share that the way the city is going to allocate ARPA funds is by leaning heavily on the feedback we got from the task force that held focus group meetings. And the task force determined that the 3 top kind of priorities among the community were housing, childcare, and economic development, especially workforce development. So we'll be having a conversation this evening to try to set up a process whereby people could fairly apply for funds, understanding that, we're definitely going to weight the priorities of the community higher, which it could be argued that this falls into one of those buckets, maybe 2. So again, that conversation will be happening tonight. I'm not sure that solves the immediate problem that you have, because it seems like you could have additional struggles with people with vacancies, basically, if you don't get assistance quickly. But we do hope to start allocating relatively quickly as soon as we have that process outlined, which I don't know if we'll get the process outlined completely this evening. Anybody else have thoughts on that or other tools that could be used to assist?
Well, the IWW, my understanding of it is it could be used, but it's only $20,000 and it's a no interest loan for 7 years. So
Okay.
there is a cap of $20,000.
I've heard that as well.
Okay.
Have you had any look? Have you looked at any of the downtown CDBG options for grants on this?
We are looking at CDBG, but it's for commercial development, and the elevator is really only to access apartments. So I don't think we meet the criteria. I had looked at one time of thinking, can we make rooftop access for commercial space downstairs, and trying to, juggle it through loopholes some way. I haven't found a path yet.
Okay.
Not to say it doesn't exist, but
The other one I would look at is the USDA REAP grant and loan program,
okay.
because you're updating the electrical system, so it shows some efficiencies, and that's what they go for. So that program would do, if you get a grant, it's 25% of the project, but you have to get the grant before you can start any work.
Okay.
They also offer a loan program for the other 75%.
Okay.
There's a business in town that was able to get one of their grants, and they hired a grant writer for a couple $1,000. I can get the name of that grant writer.
That'd be great.
It's worth a shot.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's funds from out of town, too.
Thank you.
So
That'd be great.
that's nice.
USDA REAP?
REAP.
REAP. Thank you. I'll look into that. I also looked into the historic tax credits because we have an application open for Kansas state tax credits, and we will be able to get 25% refund on the expenses. So I didn't even think to mention that. Thank you so much. So that will come after the conclusion of our application, and we submit all the financials and everything. They give it a refund as a tax certificate.
Okay. Well, we'll keep you posted on what happens this evening and the process that's going to be outlined, because we do want to be, I guess, as supportive of this project as possible. It's really incredible what you're doing in the downtown area, and I know that it's not easy and it's not an inexpensive venture. We are endeavoring to find a process that is as fair and equitable as possible, and won't lead to the greatest outcome for the community. So, any other thoughts?
Can I just ask about the ARPA? What, in terms of timeline, how would that play out? Like, assuming you did come to a conclusion tonight, you all can agree on a process, how long would that take for the funds to come through?
Well, so the city has the funds, and they have to be encumbered by the end of 2024, but we would like to put them to work in our community as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. So if we could outline a process this evening, hopefully we could put the grant application process together in, I guess, this, late spring, early summer, because that's when we do our budget, and we really want to align the goals of the budget with this process so that, we make sure that we're, spending the money in a way that is, again, in alignment with what the community wants and what projects were already in the works in the queue for CIP and things like that.
Okay.
So does anybody else have thoughts on the timeline? I was hoping we could get the money out quickly once we have a process.
Yeah, I think once we have a process, we should be able to take applications, and then we have somebody that's going to, we'll
Score
talk about
them.
it more this evening, but I'm hoping once we get that ironed out, we can start taking applications. And I'm sure we'll discuss about how we get the word out for applications and all of that kind of stuff later this evening. So we are digging into that discussion, and I believe once we get into it, we want to start taking applications that are weighted with the community survey, so that and that's something that we're all committed to. So
Yeah.
if your buckets are economic development and housing, those are two of the three buckets that were identified. So I think once we get an application process and an application for you to fill out, we would welcome you to fill it out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Others in the audience who would like to address the council?
Council, Dave Sotelo, Human Relations Officer. Just wanted to make you all aware in the community about our minority business mixer that we're having tonight in partnership with the Human Relations Office and the Hutch Chamber of Commerce. We're hoping to have this events every 2 months or so. This came from months of working with community members, getting a lot of feedback of that was one of the needs from minority folks in our community, having an event where they can network and try to spur some connectivity amongst the entrepreneurs in our community. So really excited about this event and really grateful to Heartland Credit Union for hosting us and sponsoring this event. It'll be today at 5:30 at 129 West Avenue A, which is the Heartland branch there on Avenue A. So looking forward to seeing everyone there.
Yeah. And David, to be clear, this event is open to anyone in the community, right?
That's correct. So the chamber is a partner in this, but usually for chamber events, you need a membership to come to those events. But we thought it would be ideal if chamber membership wasn't required for this event. So everyone is welcome to attend this minority business mixer.
Great. Thank you so much.
Any other questions?
Questions? No? Okay.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to address the council? Okay, hearing none, next item, please.
Item 6, consent agenda.
Is there a motion or further discussion on the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda and authorize the mayor to sign.
I second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Garza,
Yes.
Fast,
Yes.
Bagwell,
Yes.
Richardson,
Yes.
Flowers de Carvalho.
Yes, next item, please.
Item 7A, consider resolution approving a special event in a designated entertainment district for Salt City Brewery.
Paul Brown, City Attorney. You have before you a proposed resolution for the Salt City event on April 16th. This is an event they've had before. It is straight out in front of the Salt City Brewery in the 500 block of North Main, which they are asking to close. Since it is in the city street, it requires a specific resolution for permission to do that. That proposed resolution is before you, and we'd ask that you approve it.
Questions?
No, I think it's great.
Yeah. I understand this event is going to be held in support of victims of the recent fires.
I think that was an earlier event
Okay.
that they put on for that.
Oh, I think you're right. That might have
I
been
think it was
last.
last weekend.
Okay. They're on a roll over there, aren't they? Doing all kinds of fun events. Okay, is there a motion?
Motion to approve a resolution to authorize a special event pursuant to City Code Section 18801 and authorize mayor to sign.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any comments? Please call the roll.
Garza,
Yes.
Fast,
Yes.
Bagwell,
Yes.
Richardson,
Yes.
Flowers de Carvalho.
Yes, next item, please.
Item 7B, consider ordinance amending various sections of Chapter 27 zoning regulations.
Good morning. Ryan Beatlick, Director of Planning and Development. Before you this morning is a series of text amendments that the Planning Department has been working on for the last couple of months that went through the Planning Commission 2 weeks ago and are now before you this morning for you all to take action on. So I'll kind of give, once again, kind of what the Planning Commission's and what the Council's role is, and then a little bit of a history of how we got here. So one of the duties of the Planning Commission is to review the zoning regulations, consider any needed amendments, to hold the public hearing, and to make a recommendation to City Council, which is why these are before you this morning. These amendments that I'm about to present are based on comments that are received from the Commission, the public, and recommendations from professional staff. The Planning Commission held a study session on these amendments on February 22nd. Our Development Review Committee reviewed these on February 22nd as well. And there was a public hearing that was held on March 22nd. And Planning Commission did recommend with a vote of 5-0 to bring most of these amendments to you. And there is one on here that I will highlight that they did request to be tabled for a little bit further study. So the amendments before you this morning are in several different sections of the ordinance. So we're looking at amending the location and screening requirements for detached ADUs, accessory dwelling units, also known as granny flats. Requiring a special use permit for eating and drinking establishments in our R6 zoning district. Clarifying our driveway setback from alleys in the R6 zoning district. Removing the requirement for a temporary use permit for portable storage units on residential properties. Revise our parking standards for eating and drinking establishments without seating. Amending the maximum sign area for certain types of signs. This next bullet is the one that was actually tabled for further study by the Planning Commission, and that was clarifying what work on an existing fence requires compliance with the existing ordinance. So that will be back before you here probably in a month or so. Revising our animal unit table. And then finally, requiring a pre-submittal meeting with nearby property owners for certain zoning district amendments. So I'm going to go through each one individually. The green text is where the actual text has been changed. Where there's a red cross through that is where we have deleted, or proposing to delete some text. So the first one is under the accessory dwelling unit design standards and use restrictions. So here all we're doing is actually clarifying the location and the screening requirements, those are for detached ADUs. So ADUs that you typically see that would be in an individual building, maybe in someone's backyard. We're not talking about ADUs that are within the residence. So oftentimes you'll have garage apartments or maybe basement apartments or things like that. We're not talking about that here. We're only talking about detached accessory dwelling units. So the first thing would be that a detached accessory dwelling unit shall be permitted only in the side or rear yards. A detached ADU shall not project into the front yard or to required side street front yards. And then a detached ADU shall be separated by adjacent residential properties by a minimum of a 6-foot privacy fence that meets the requirements of this article. Both of these were kind of already staff interpretations because it's obviously kind of hard to screen when you have an apartment on the second floor or something like that. So we haven't been requiring that for all ADUs. We have had this interpretation, but we're just standardizing that interpretation and putting it into the ordinance. So moving on, the next section is 27406B. This is our use table for commercial uses. The only thing we're changing here is that we are changing from permitting with design requirements to permitting with a special use permit and design requirements in the R6 zoning district for eating and drinking establishments. The reason why we're actually increasing this is we have had a couple requests for people who have shown some interest in maybe putting a restaurant in our R6 zoning district. So our R6 zoning district is kind of the residential areas that are south of 17th. These are typically smaller lots. The homes are a lot closer together, but we also realize that these are more unique neighborhoods that you do see oftentimes a mix of uses, and you'll see some commercial that are in there. And there is certainly, a need and an understanding of that some of these commercial uses are good for the neighborhood, but we are recommending a special use permit. And the reason for that would be that that special use permit gives notice to the neighbors, allows them to comment, and then also allows for the planning commission to review these on an individual basis. We think in general that this is a use that could be beneficial to a neighborhood, but we also do understand that restaurants carry with them unique type of impacts on the land with hours of operation. You may have dining outside, you may have large amounts of parking, business restaurants open until 10 o'clock on the weekends, and that can become potentially a detriment to the neighborhood. So we're not saying that we want to completely get rid of it, but we do want to have where the neighbors have a little bit more say. So we think a special use permit is that option there. So
Ryan, on that particular item, was there something that spurred that change?
we did have a request from a property owner off of it would be Plum and blanking on, I want to say it's Avenue C, that they wanted to, there was a vacant lot and they wanted to put it was basically going to be a food truck that was going to be turned into a permanent structure. And so when we looked at it, we didn't really have a lot of things of where we could ensure that it wasn't going to be an impact to the neighborhood. And so we wanted to do that. They rated some other issues in terms of getting proper approvals from the state, in terms of getting for utilities and things like that. But it did make us notice that we didn't really have an ability for the neighbors to really be able to weigh in. And so that's why we wanted to still allow for it, but require that SUP in that district. So
Thank you.
That food truck can't sit on there then, it has to be a building, correct?
it has to be a building, that is correct.
So the food truck, he couldn't put the food truck, he has to build a building.
Yes, or and in this case, what he was going to do is actually convert it into a
Yes,
small building.
I know, yes, okay.
Yeah, because we don't allow for food trucks on a temporary basis on a residential property. They're only allowed on commercially zoned properties. And so what they were going to do was convert a food truck into a restaurant. But there was some concerns about utilities and things like that. And in this case, we didn't have really any neighbor concerns, but it did illustrate that there could be a chance of where a neighbor may have a concern about having a restaurant going in next to them. So that's why we're recommending requiring the special use permit.
Is there any cost associated to that permit? Is it small or?
It's I believe it's $165, and that
Okay.
covers the public notice that we have to do, the mailing of the letter, the putting in the paper, and a little bit of staff's time for actually reviewing it.
Okay.
It goes through the planning commission.
So it's not necessarily some onerous regulation. It's just allowing the neighborhood to weigh in.
Yeah, and it does take 4 to 6 weeks because of with the notice requirements and for staff to have to review it. But yeah, it's not. It's kind of a step below like a rezoning is the best way that I can explain it. But it still requires very similar type of notices because it is a public hearing.
Okay, thank you.
So I apologize. This is very small, but the next one is the 27413B height and lot requirements in our R6 zoning district. Really, all we did here was under the rear yard. We have a standard already where you see right here in 413C3 talks about alley driveway access, and that's just where if you're accessing the property from the rear through a driveway and you have an alley, you have to keep 10 feet setback for any garage or anything like that. That was something that was missed, and so we're just making a note on that chart to refer the reader as well as staff to make sure that they include that section. And the reasoning for that is because we don't want, if you have a garage that's only 5 feet or so away from the alley, you oftentimes have a vehicle that might block the alley and things like that. So that 10 feet gives enough room for somebody to be able to back out safely and not be hanging out in the middle of the alley. So it's not changing anything, it's just drawing attention to that section of the ordinance that has been oftentimes missed. So this next one, 27601G, uses not requiring a temporary use permit. So in this, we are moving the portable storage units on residential properties from 27601F, which is the section of our ordinance that outlines uses that do require a temporary use permit. We are moving it to uses that do not require a temporary use permit. Still, all of the location and time standards would still apply. It just removes the requirement for somebody having to get a temporary use permit to put these units on residential properties. The staff is not recommending at this point that we would remove the temporary use permit requirement for these portable storage units on commercial or industrial properties, and the reasoning for that is that you can have those up to 120 days on a piece of property. So that longer time, length of time, we think, we want to make sure that it is actually being placed in a proper location, not causing, circulation issues or things like that with the property. With a residential, thanks to Councilman Fast, you had brought this to our attention. It's not necessarily the greatest welcoming, to somebody in the community, and oftentimes these are folks who are maybe moving. The last thing they're thinking in their mind is, I've got to go to City Hall to get a permit for this. So we're not changing the location requirements. You still cannot place it on the street. You can't have more than one, and then there is still those time requirements. So we're not changing any of those things. We're just saying you don't have to get a permit for them. And then you do see that there is one small area that's crossed out upon the review of the city attorney. He noted that upon the reasonable notice, the property owner, city may inspect the contents. That section runs afoul of the Fourth Amendment, and so we were removing that. So
Now, if they need more time, can they come back and get an extension?
we do allow for an extension of up to an additional 7 days, so you can have up to 14 days.
Thanks. Thank you, Ryan, for taking care of that.
Yeah, absolutely. The next section here, this is our table of off-street parking standards. Not too much changing here. We just added an additional note that we noticed that there are more businesses now that are doing like takeout only for like restaurants, so they don't have internal seating. You'll see that like the new Scooters Coffee at 30th and Waldron there. They do not have any internal seating, and so the question kind of came up, well, how much parking do you actually require for these? Because right now what the ordinance says is it's based on the number of seats. We have some uses that don't have any seats, and so what we are saying is that that would be based on the number of employees on the largest staff shift. So if you have 4 employees at one time, we're going to require a minimum of 4 spaces. And so that still make sure that there's enough parking for the employees, but like I said, we don't have to necessarily deal with customer parking because there's no internal seating. So we think that that's something that we noticed, especially with COVID, that we've had a lot more businesses that are going to just carry out, and so we want to ensure that our ordinance is up to date on those.
Ryan, I am concerned about that particular one, that it's going to add a significant cost. I mean, isn't a parking stall about $5,000 per parking stall when you run concrete? That concerns me a little bit, but I think overall this group of adjustments are probably going to be fine, but I don't want to make it harder for businesses.
I know,
I feel like we
talked
worked
about
really
it. Have-
hard to right
Have you
size
looked
our
at some
parking.
of the parking requirements for the bigger stores and making those smaller? Have we done that
We did
yet?
recently look at those as early,
Yeah.
or recently as I believe 2018. We did a wholesale change in our parking ordinance. We actually got rid of minimum parking standards.
Yeah.
And went more with parking maximums. We got rid of the parking maximums. We just have basic just parking minimums. But basically what that means is that we're looking at these because beforehand, like a Walmart, for example,
Yeah.
we like to joke in the planning world, it's the 100-year parking event. Really, the parking lots, most codes are set for that 2 weeks before Christmas when stores are busy, and the rest of the half of the year, the parking lot is empty. We don't think that's a useful, use of space. There's stormwater issues. There's additional issues like that.
Kohl's.
Yep, exactly.
Kohl's is normally always.
It's
not full.
except for those
right
busy
around-
times of year, and so you have to balance that. We have recently did that. We're always looking at that to try to figure that out. Part of why we went with the employee thing is that it's a sense of fairness because you have all other businesses that have to have some sort of parking, and so we did need to require some parking for employees. So we thought this was the best way to do it to get the minimum amount of parking that you really need without overburdening a business with it requiring just an extreme amount of parking. But yeah, we certainly can look at them again. But yeah, they were recently updated about 2018. So.
Ryan, I'm curious if there's an existing business, maybe a carryout business that doesn't have the spaces that this new requirement would say is necessary. Are they grandfathered in, or would they have to come?
They are grandfathered.
Okay.
So yeah, the only time when you would have to actually potentially change your parking is if you were doing more than a 30% expansion of the building, and then that's when our parking requirements kick in. That's when our landscaping requirements would kick in. If you're doing minor changes or changing from one use to another, we're not going to make somebody now go in and add additional parking. It's one of those things that we kind of trust businesses also to monitor themselves and let us know when they need additional parking. Businesses are not shy of letting us know of when they need that. So.
Yeah. And was there an instance that it came to light that there wasn't enough parking for employees?
The issue was the scooters parking of the scooters at 30th and Waldron. That just recently went through, we reviewed that. We didn't really have a standard, and once again we had been using an interpretation of the ordinance that allows for the director of engineering and myself to kind of say, okay, what's the minimum parking we need here? And so we have a couple of other places in the ordinance where it's based on the number of employees, and so we're just kind of carrying that over to these businesses that don't have internal seating. So
Great. Thank you.
yeah. So next is a series of amendments to our sign ordinance. Very, very simple. This is just some clarification. We had several sections of the ordinance where we allow for multiple sign types on a property. So these are mostly our directional signs. So we allow for, like on commercial properties, for example, we allow up to 2 directional signs. So those are the little signs that you'll see at McDonald's that might have the logo and then a direction that says entrance and exit. There was just some questions on what is the maximum sign area. And so it just said, for example, the directional signs for commercial 6 square feet. We allow for 2. The question is that 6 square feet for all of the signs, or is it 6 square feet per sign? So we just clarified that. So in these cases where we're talking about where you can have multiple signs of the same sign type, that it's based per sign, not the overall allowance of signs on the property. So just a clarification there, not really changing anything. Once again, something we had already been kind of doing, but we wanted to ensure that it was actually codified. The next one is 27-918, the keeping of animals. So, for the most part, our zoning ordinance does not allow for farm animals, with the exception of 2 zoning districts. We allow them in our TA, which is our transitional agricultural, and our R1, which is our rural residential. If you look at what is currently in the animal unit table now, you will see a large, long list of subcategories under each animal. They were based on age, they were based on weight, caused an administrative hassle. You had to talk with the property owner, figure out, okay, is this a 400-pound cow, a 500-pound cow? What happens when that cow goes from 400 pounds to 500 pounds? So we're getting rid of all of that. It was far too complicated,
Yeah.
and honestly, we don't have time to determine, is it a yearling horse, is it a 2-year-old horse, is it a 3-year-old
Yeah.
horse? So we got rid of all that. We kept it much simpler. So our animal units, this is based on the number of animals per acre that you can have. So for cattle, it's 1 per acre. Horses, 1 per acre. Sheep, deer, and goats, you can have up to 5 per acre. Pigs and hogs, you can have 4 per acre. Your chickens, turkeys, ducks, game birds, geese, other poultry, you can have 20 per acre. Once again, this is only on your TA and your R1 properties. So not many properties in the city. They're mostly out on the west side of the city. Larger lots that are well over an acre of land. This does not include what we like to call the chicken ordinance, which is where we do allow for some small chickens within the city for people for eggs and things like that. That does not apply here. This is just for those R1 and TA properties. The other thing we did, you can see on the bottom, is that there's a section C that had a whole laundry list of where animals were not permitted in the city. It's kind of redundant because previously right above it we said here are the districts that they are allowed. So we stripped that out. We always like to say where things are permitted, not necessarily where they're not permitted. So we think this will clarify it, because like I said, we kind of ran into the issue, what happens when your animal gets bigger? Now you're potentially out of compliance. It just was a hassle, and it was one of those things that it became an administrative issue. So we think this is going to drastically, hopefully improve the ordinance on that. So. And then the final one, this is a fairly big change. We're fortunate that in Hutchinson we don't have very many controversial rezonings. We're not like Johnson County, where there's just so much growth pressures that any rezoning is really controversial. But we have had a couple in the community. One of the things that I have tried to do since I have taken over the director's role in the department is to front end load our processes. So really get a lot of those issues taken care of at the beginning of the project so that it sets the table for a developer. They know what is expected of them, and hopefully the rest of the project's a little bit easier for them. One of the things that we have looked at is, and we have heard from residents, is when we send out our notices under state law, we send them out 20 days prior. With mail and everything, people get them 10 to 14 days before a meeting. We all know you get mail, you may not open it for a couple of days. So people oftentimes are only really getting notice of a zoning change in their neighborhood maybe 7 days before a meeting. Not really enough time for somebody to really research the issues and be able to come up with what their concerns are. So what we are recommending here is to change our zoning amendment processes, and that we would require that prior to submittal of an application for a zoning district amendment, which changes the classification of the zoning district. So that would be if you're going from residential to commercial, or commercial to residential, or commercial and industrial, you're changing the classification of it. We would require that the applicant has to notify all the property owners that would be required to be notified under state law of a meeting with the applicant. This notice would have to be provided by first class mail at least 7 days prior to the meeting. The purpose of this meeting is for the applicant to actually meet with the neighbors, or have an opportunity to meet with the neighbors before they submit an application, to let the neighbors know what they're proposing, hear what their concerns are, and be able to address those concerns before they get before planning commission, or before they get before city council. Oftentimes, we will have times where neighbors have a concern, planning commission ends up tabling the project for a month or whatever, that delays them. And a lot of times, that could have maybe been discussed prior to submittal of the application, and we end up not having to delay them a month. So there are some concerns about how do you administer this, and that's why we placed at the end is that the applicant would have to submit a list of addresses noticed as well as a summary report of the meeting with their application. So that would just be another application requirement that they would need to submit, another piece of information they would need to submit with their application. And our hope is that this will foster a little bit more communication between the developer and the neighbors, hopefully allowing the neighbors to have a little bit more opportunity to at least have a voice in what a potential development is. So kind of a newer idea, but one of my biggest things is I always like to allow the property owners and neighbors to actually have an opportunity to really voice their concerns, because they're the ones that have to live with whatever might be going in next door to them for the rest of their time that they're on that property. So
What's the requirement for who you have to notify?
so typically it's anyone within 200 feet of the property. There's a little bit of, if it's on the city's boundary, you have to notify them within 1,000 feet. But if you're within the city itself, like in the middle of the city, it's 200 feet.
Well,
And
this is,
you, oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Do you still have to send out your notification as well? So there'll be a second notification?
There'll be a second notification. We still will place the ad in the paper. We'll still place the sign on the property. This is just kind of a
Making the application process more difficult?
I can understand that could be an additional step, but our hope is that that additional step, that additional time in the beginning actually saves them time in the process, because the entitlement process, the approval process.
Well, I think
will
if
hopefully be
somebody was
smoother.
probably upset, they're just still gonna stay upset. Cause if, usually like a lot of times, like a person's like, nope, I don't like this, and they're gonna stick with that.
And you're always going to have that, but often,
Yeah.
but I will say, I've worked in communities where rezonings are a lot more controversial, and oftentimes it may be something of, just adding some additional screening or something like that. There oftentimes can be rather simple changes that can be made to a rezoning plan that can alleviate neighbors' concerns.
I know, but I mean, first class mail is expensive. Having to mail stuff out, finding out all the properties and addresses I need to mail, like you're putting that on to the applicant. So I'm looking at this and going, yeah, I don't like it.
My question is this only for switching between categories as far as commercial to industrial, or does it include within the category I1 to I2?
No, we're only
It's
doing
the more
it-
drastic changes.
A very drastic change, yes, where you're changing, from residential to commercial or commercial to industrial. So it's not going to encompass very many, but we think of something that is that high of a level of where you're doing a pretty drastic change of what's on a property. We believe that this additional notice may be warranted.
I think the council has heard from residents that, we don't do the best job of communicating. We're going to make a drastic change, and they want to have a stronger voice in those decisions, such as the Woody seat. So, I think anything that we could do to encourage developers to have those conversations with the neighborhood to streamline the process further on. I'm with you.
I don't
It
think it'll
gets
streamline the
it gets
process.
held up at the planning commission all the time, and then I get calls, why do we have to wait another month? And a lot of that could be, I agree, Sarah, it could be another burden,
Yeah, it's just
but
adding
it could
more
also
red tape to something.
ease
It's
the
not-
process further down.
It's just,
And there are ways we can ease the process. One of the things we already do for people is that we can provide the addresses to folks, so they're not actually having to pull that. That's something we can do internally in about 20 minutes. But somebody who doesn't have GIS, a mapping software, that's going to take them a lot longer to do. They'd have to go on the county website. They'd have to figure all that out. So we're able to do that for them. 200 feet at the most, you're looking at maybe 20 letters. We're not like a lot of other communities that require 500 feet or more for noticing. So at 55 cents a letter, you can do the math. You're talking $15 to $20 maybe at the most for actual postage costs. So that, coupled with the fact that we're not requiring for all rezonings, so it's really only those substantial rezonings. Honestly, I would anticipate we're maybe only looking at maybe 1 to 2 of these maybe a year.
Could you provide an example of where this?
A great example would be there was a rezoning about 2 years ago, corner of 23rd and Brentwood.
Yeah, I remember that. It
Property
didn't end up being built.
Didn't end up getting built. Neighbors had some concerns about it. It went from residential to commercial. The neighbors were quite concerned. They're like, we thought this was always going to be residential. Now you're saying it could be commercial. That was a fairly substantial change, and that was probably one of the more controversial rezonings we've had in a couple of years. In this case, one of the things we heard from folks was, I just didn't get enough time to really, notice, to know what even to expect, what to do with this situation. They came to the Planning Commission, raised some concerns. I believe the Planning Commission actually ended up approving it, but still, it was fairly controversial, and it kind of caused a little bit of animosity in the neighborhood. And so that would probably be the most recent change, and I think that's probably the most recent where we went from a completely different zoning category to a completely different one. So we're not looking at this happening very often. We're not like Johnson County, where you're going to have a bunch of farmland that's been zoned agricultural, but all of a sudden it's going to be rezoned to commercial, and you're going to have 300,000 square feet of retail space and things like that, and huge impacts on the neighbors. This is not going to be super often, but at the same time, we do have some land, and our comp plan does show some areas that we are looking to eventually potentially encourage a potential change in the land use. And so we do have some areas in the city where we think that this could apply.
Sarah, my heart is with you on this, but 200 feet is from here to where we pay our water bill. It's not going to require too much, and if it helps people on the back end, I might be okay with it. But I'm with you. I don't want it to be harder for people.
It's just redundancy if you have to set a meeting with them and then set a meeting again and show your lists when you fill out your application. Then they have to do the state required. You have to notify 20 days before anyways.
I just know that when it comes to the meeting, like we typically end up approving. We tend to default to business rights versus residential rights on this council, and but those residents never feel heard. They come to the city council meetings. They say, "You were trying to sneak this in. Nobody gave us time to respond." So I think anything that raises the voices of the people in that area is gonna help with them feeling like government isn't working against them. I have bigger concerns over the parking thing, because I think we spent so much time trying to eliminate unneeded parking, and so I mean, I guess we're just kind of all over the place on these adjustments, Ryan, but I would just encourage you to continue going through the list, and maybe we can have some robust discussion. I don't know if anybody from the Planning Commission is here today. Yeah, they left you here to fend for yourself.
That's our job, though, is we are the ones who research these and looked at good planning practices and what other peer communities are doing.
Yeah.
So.
I would point out, if someone is looking at changing, doing a drastic change, this does give them the opportunity to get someone to speak on their behalf in a positive manner on the change as well. I mean, sometimes you get neighbors that, excuse me, like with the Brentwood, there were two or three neighbors that actually came and spoke in positive of making the change, which I think steered the committee a little bit on feeling comfortable making the change if the people that live there were actually showing up and saying, yeah, we're fine with this.
Yeah. In my opinion, one of the worst things that can happen during a planning commission is where you have a bunch of neighbors that are concerned, and you have a developer who's making changes on the fly to get an approval. And what ends up happening is then once all the dust settles, the applicant may realize that wasn't exactly maybe what I wanted to do, and now they kind of feel like they're also being sort of forced into something that they may have not been comfortable with. So like I said, I'm a big believer in trying to front end load our processes as much as possible. Spend a little bit more time in that approval process, but it makes things a lot more smoother when you actually get to, you know, where you're spending some real money in terms of building and things like that. So.
And I will say in the industry in which I work, that is our philosophy, and we have learned the hard way that we will only invest in communities that really want us there. So we front load we load the front end of our processes and determine where we spend our capital that way by reaching out to the neighbors directly.
If we were going to backtrack the problem that caused this, it's giving people enough time to process if they get a letter what's going on. So the catch-22 there is, do we add more time to the timeline to give people another week, and then slows down the developer on their ability to move their timeline forward? It's a catch-22 on the whole situation.
Yeah, our job is to try to, you know, what I see, you know, the planning department's job is to balance both the interests and needs of the property owner and their rights to develop their property, but also the interests and rights of the neighbors to ensure that they have adequate voice in what happens in their neighborhood. And so that's always that balance, that's always that tricky part of the public participation component.
I wonder if it could be done concurrently. I think the bigger issue is that I'm more likely to
So they
recycle
have
a
to
letter
hold a
from the
meeting.
city
Where are they
than
gonna hold the
I
meeting
would
at?
another letter.
I mean, that's up to them. You know, we have places where folks could meet here at City Hall if need be. Oftentimes, developers will like hold, maybe on the site of where they're actually doing it. That allows for the neighbors to be able to actually see a little bit better of like, oh, okay, my house is over there. I understand they're building over here. Okay, that's not as that. Sometimes people want to actually see what it's going to look like out in the world. It's a lot different than looking at it on a piece of paper. So that's kind of up to the developer, and we certainly will accommodate, you know, folks with that, just like we do with any other type of request. So, and that wraps up staff's presentation.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the effort to continually review our guidelines and make sure that they're right-sized for our community and strike the ones that are adding additional burdens. But I do have concerns on the parking one, simply because parking is expensive, it contributes to stormwater issues, and I think it sends the wrong message. Like, it's a cultural thing. If you go into other communities and you have to walk 3 blocks to go to a shop, it's not a big deal. And like, why are we I guess it's different if you're working there, but what for instance, what do the scooters employees do now?
So they have some parking because as we interpreted it, we said, well, you need to at least have enough for your staff. And then I do believe they actually have also partnered with the VA because they have some unused spaces as well.
Yeah.
So
I think that's what people do, Ryan. They get creative. And I just don't know why we need additional seas of concrete in our community when space could be better utilized for green space, for larger developments. I mean, it's just it's a philosophical difference in opinion from the planning perspective that I as a resident have than you as a professional have. But other than that, and if the council's in consensus that these are needed changes, I'm fine with going along with it. In 2018, we spent a lot of time looking at what were ridiculous regulations. You had no hand in like putting together, so that isn't a.
No, I did see them prior. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, there's been a big change, and believe me, I am not somebody who wants to see unused parking. It drives me crazy seeing Kohl's and Walmart and how much unused parking there is. But at the same time, we do have to balance the fact that you have to provide parking for employees at least, and what happens when you start doing kind of these informal sharing agreements. You have issues of what happens to the VA now. All of a sudden has more patients. Well, now potentially scooters. If we didn't require them to have any parking, scooters people have to park somewhere. And so that's why we were trying to figure out what's the minimum parking in those type of situations. And then, like I said, it's also a bit of a fairness thing of that, we require pretty much all other, with the exception of downtown, we require pretty much every other business to at least provide enough parking for their employees, and then customers, if they actually have any customers that come in. So
Yeah.
in this case, we're saying at least employees. But I get it, and I don't relish
Yeah.
I don't relish the idea of having additional parking.
Yeah.
I am definitely of team let's look at where parking is actually needed.
I would think that they would want to put employee parking
Yeah.
so that they could.
Then why require it? I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know. It's not the hill
Yeah.
I'm going to die
No, I
on.
get
I'll
what I'm
support
saying,
it,
like-
but
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
My first thought when I read through it was, well, they can park down the street if they want to work there. And then my
Yeah.
second thought was exactly what you just said. As a business owner, I'm gonna try to
take
keep
care of my people.
employees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I already mentioned I don't have a huge problem with it. I think overall.
Yeah, but then I kind of side with Jade. Like, what if you have a small, kind of like food truck type place, and you're you're the one running it, so you're like the one employee. Do you have to create one parking spot now?
I mean, how our ordinance is written, yeah, you would.
You know what I mean? What if you ride your bike and you're cool with it, and you don't need, and like you don't intend to? So I get what you're saying there. Is there a need to require it? But then, I don't know.
I just
I
wish
mean,
that we
but-
had parking for those with disabilities, and the rest of it, I mean, I just figure like the market will take care of it. But
Yeah.
again, not the hill I'm going to die on. Just wanted to mention those concerns.
I mean, so you've been requiring that regardless of the verbiage?
Yeah, because that kind of how
Yeah.
the ordinance is written. We have some leeway in what we look
Yeah.
at what the actual maximum demand is for a property. And then we have discussions with the engineering department as well. And yeah, in those cases, we've always pretty much have said, well, you need to at least provide enough for your employees. And if you look, there's other places within the ordinance where you might not have seating, or where you might not have internal areas for customers, where we base it on the number of employees. So we were just carrying that over because we noticed it was a potential issue that we saw maybe coming down the pipe.
Okay. Further discussion or motion on this issue?
Well, I sitting here being quiet and thinking all that. I think it's the older residents here that are here now don't have to worry about this. It's our newer business people have to come in and deal with this. Am I right?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I agree. It's kind of a problem like you're saying, but I think we have to move on. And I see a need in this. As far as the motion for the residential or whatever, I think that's a good one. That way we've had problems. I know I've seen problems that people say they don't know when this is, they don't know about the meetings that contain to their area. And I think that even though it makes more, we have to have another step. And then the residents have to do it on their own. It's not the city going out there and making sure that the people know, correct?
You're gonna add a layer of red tape. Where are you taking away 2 other steps at then?
Well,
I don't like adding anything.
I understand.
Yeah.
I think it's a good move. Just on the case that people have to, the residents themselves have to let each other know what's going on in their community.
Yeah.
At that point, I think that's good.
I just think,
comments?
we have some issues already where people feel like they just have to jump through so many hurdles to get stuff done. And this just adds another one where they have to plan for a meeting and plan to mail stuff out and come down to the city and get a list. And the city's already state required to notify these people, and they have the opportunity. When Brentwood happened, people showed up, right?
Yeah, people did show up, yes.
Yeah, so.
Is this an application where we could put a sign on the property to notify the neighborhood of a meeting?
We
It
could
has to be mailed to certified.
potentially
As an
do that. I mean,
alternative.
we already do place a sign on the property, but that's for the actual public hearing.
Right.
But, I mean, that's something we could look at doing is also placing a sign on the property.
Ryan, that's something we're doing that's new, correct?
Yes, yeah, that was something that before I arrived, we did not have that requirement. And that was kind of a reflection of that the newspaper is not the most effective way to notify the public.
So to Sarah's point, maybe it will happen kind of on its own without another
Layer.
layer.
Yeah. Yep, that's what I'm saying. I say we approve and we strike that last thing out.
What was the feedback from the planning commission on that particular item?
Surprisingly, they didn't have too much. They initially, there was question of, is this for every rezoning? And we looked at it, we said, well, that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense if you're going, because how our zoning ordinance is set up, it kind of builds upon itself. So, you know, what's allowed in R4, now that you go to R5, we allow for, you know, apartments. You know, basically that's about it. So it kind of builds upon itself, so there wasn't as much concern about that. We really wanted to try to fine tune this so that it was really for those big rezonings that are going to completely change, you know, going from a residential type use to a commercial type use or something like that. So that seemed to be what the feedback was, and that's what we went with when we looked at changing this.
So Ryan, does a large rezoning such that this would apply to trigger a pre-development meeting, like the development committee?
We do not require any, we
Okay.
don't require pre-submittal analysis or pre-development
Okay.
meetings. We strongly encourage it, but we do not have in our ordinance that that's required. That being said, most developers, if they're doing a rezoning, they do reach out to us. We have conversation with them. We walk them through the process. We let them know, okay, yeah, this is some things you need to watch out for in the process, but we don't require that pre-submittal meeting.
I wonder if it would be appropriate to include this in recommendations in pre-submittal. I know you just said it's not required, but if the intent is to make it easier and streamline the process further down so that it doesn't cause a lot of controversy at the planning commission with the public hearing or at the city council, why not just really encourage it when they first reach out to the city? Say that this is something that we feel is going to make it easier on you during the public hearing process.
I'll maybe let Paul speak to that a little bit, but I know I have some reservations of putting recommendations in the ordinance. I don't believe that's really the proper place to put something.
Well, I don't think that, I say we strike it, and I mean, you recommend when they come to you. It doesn't have to be in the, I know we've done a lot of half-hearted ordinances that way. We have recommendations on sidewalks,
Recommendations on landscaping and some other things like that.
May as
We have
well.
our whole landscape section's a recommendation for the most part, and honestly, when we bring that up to a developer, you might have someone who takes that, but most people are like, what's the ordinance going to require me to do? So I would say, unfortunately, a lot of our recommendations oftentimes fall on deaf ears. What I can say is that we certainly can have that conversation with the developer and say, you know what, hey, this is a pretty big change for the neighborhood. You might be well served to communicate with the neighbors.
Yeah.
It might make your public hearing process go a little bit more smooth. We certainly can have that, and we have that conversation with them anyway. This is just kind of codifying that. But
Yeah.
I do completely understand the council's concerns.
What would be the harm in giving someone the option of either sending out first-class letters to the people within 200 feet or placing a notice on the property of significant visibility and obnoxiousness that anyone in the neighborhood would see it, and if they care, they would take note and call in. At least it gives the developer an option. So they can say, either I can just place a sign here, or I can go through the process of first-class mail. And
Would you still require a meeting?
I wouldn't, because the big thing for me would be the fact that people are aware of the situation and they have the ability to call in and ask what's going on. Show up at the planning and zoning meeting on this date. That's when the public hearing. That's when we're going to talk about it.
We already
Doesn't
do
the
that.
sign go up already?
We already
What-
do that. We already do have a sign that
Yeah.
goes on the property that
That's what I'm
is-
saying, we're
it's a
just
smaller
adding.
real estate size sign, but we do have a sign, and we with the information, we put on brightly colored paper so that folks can see it. So
See?
we
So I
do
don't-
already place
yeah.
a sign, we do already mail this. This
Well,
would
and-
be kind of having that pre-conversation with the neighbors before a developer gets too far down the line with their plans.
Just extra red tape.
Yeah, I don't sense a lot of support
Yeah.
for that measure. I appreciate what you're trying to do. Again, from the business side, it's something we do, but I just don't feel great about requiring. I feel like we've worked pretty hard over the last several years to try to make it easier to do business here, and I just hate to take a step back in the wrong direction. Even with something small like this, I think it sends the message that we don't trust our developers to do the right thing. If they want to make it harder on themselves by not notifying neighbors, causing a big uproar at a public hearing, I think that's not the best way to go about doing business, but that certainly should be their option.
I have one comment, and then I'll make the motion. I did enjoy reading through this last week about the animal. It provided much comedy for me, and I would remind the public that a rooster inside the city limit is illegal. I don't know how
Not
many.
permitted.
I don't know how many calls you've got about that.
Quite a few.
but I've gotten several calls. So
Yes, that's a good reminder. Roosters
Where are
not
they?
permitted.
Yeah.
I get
I
calls
hear
from
them,
both
but-
sides.
Yeah.
Like, we should be able to have roosters so that we can populate our own chickens and not have to buy new chicken. My neighbor has a rooster and I'm not supposed to have a rooster.
Crows at
So-
five
I've got some
in the
goat
morning.
calls. People want to have their goats too. It's
Yeah.
Well, I will make the motion to accept and approve by at least a majority vote of 4 to 5 council members and return to the Planning Commission the recommendation of the Planning Commission and strike the zoning amendment 27-1202 from that and add these zoning regulations to the City Code of Hutchinson and authorize the mayor to sign.
Just a quick clarification. I think for this, the only thing you would need to do would be to amend and approve, and your amendment would be striking the amendment to
Okay.
section 1202.
yeah.
Section
Do
1202.
you have that, Linda, amended and
I do,
approved?
thank you.
Linda is.
So make sure we're clear on what the motion is, but this
Okay.
does not have to go back before planning commission.
All right, second.
Okay, further discussion? Any comments from the audience? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Garza,
Yes.
Bast,
Yes.
Bagwell,
Yes.
Richardson,
Yes.
Iris DeCarlo.
Yes, next item, please.
Item 8A, consider tower number 3 recoding project.
Hello.
Good morning. My name is Brian Clinton. I'm the Director of Public Works. All right, so Tower 3. Tower 3 stores 500,000 gallons of water. It's located on 11th Avenue. You can see the circle there, right by a fire station. This tower is scheduled to be recoated this year, and with that exterior coating comes the opportunity to change the look of that particular tower. So we've come up with a couple of options to present to the City Council on the look. Option 1 has the white bulb with the Hutchinson, very kind of similar to Tower 1 look. And then option 2 is just the white bowl with the gray pedestal. This is the look that Tower 2 that is getting coated later this spring is going to have. This project does bid next week, and we would like to get some direction on this so that we can get that in the project and make sure we don't have a change order.
I would like to
associated.
see option 1 since it's on 11th Street. And it's not in a residential. I think people really enjoyed what we've done to the one down the street here.
Generally speaking, how much more did it cost to do Tower 1 the way we did it than it would have cost for option 2?
It's minimal
Okay.
cost.
Great.
Because you still have to paint it. So I think just the words.
It's basically a stencil
Yeah.
that we're paying for, so, yeah.
Is that a motion?
Oh, motion to approve option one? Yes.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Further discussion?
Yeah, I've got a quick question. How long, what's the longevity of this paint job?
10 to 15 years.
Okay.
So this tower was last coated in 2005, and it's getting updated in 2022, so that one lasted 17 years.
Are you gonna do the stencil on two sides of the tower or just one?
It's a good question.
Or I guess there's really no side.
Yeah.
It's round.
It's round.
It is.
Are you gonna have it facing
West or east?
well, are you gonna have it facing the airport so it can be seen by air traffic, or are you gonna have it facing toward the city?
Well, I guess that's a good discussion and a good question. So I hadn't thought of that. Which would you prefer, the entryway into the community, so folks as they come in?
Do we have two on that one?
I don't think so.
We
It's
just
just
have the
the
one.
I
Yeah.
I don't know, John.
It's an existential situation. If we get it, we can decide that later, I guess, or it could be.
Or do we
It
need
doesn't
that
matter the
decided
bid,
right now?
I guess.
Yeah, it'd be good to know if we want.
East
I
and
was
west?
picturing just one side.
How much would it cost to do east and west? What's the additional cost for the extra
You know,
stencil?
again, it's going to be minimal. I think it's just a matter of sizing. You know, you wouldn't want it to wrap around and touch each other.
I'd say
I
put it on the
Oh.
east side so you can see it from Airport Road, or you can see it if you're flying in. That would be my preference.
on the east
On
side.
the east side.
I
I like
Don't
the
feel
west side though,
strongly.
because when you're driving to Walmart or Home Depot.
love the strategic direction we
Yeah.
provide here at these meetings.
It's the details.
Yeah.
Trying
Oh,
to think of the
I
other
just don't
one.
feel strongly either way. I
Yeah.
like it. I like option one.
I like option one, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Option one, I'm gonna motion to approve option one with the lettering being more focused on the east side of the tower.
And I think I seconded that.
Seconded again, because,
Yeah, I'll second it again.
Okay.
On the east side of the tower facing Airport Road.
yes.
I'm just thankful we're not having the discussion we had on Tower One, because
Yeah.
I watched all of that and I was just like, wow.
Oh, goodness. All right. Further discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Garza,
Yeah, before I vote, I like to, I used to put the lights on top of that a long time ago, and I always thought to myself, that looked like a big old golf ball on a tee. When we put a golfer up there like he's mad at me. But anyway, I vote yes.
Bass,
Yes,
Bagwell,
Yes.
Richardson,
Yes.
Tyler Stickler
Yes. Next item, please.
Item 8B, consider bid results for fire station number 1.
We're finally here, huh?
Yeah.
I can't compete against a golf ball.
I know.
Steve Beer, Fire Chief, Hutchinson Fire Department. In 2015, City Council approved upgrades in the fire stations. That was in July of 2015. We finally got things to start the ball rolling about 2 years ago and put some budget numbers together with Mann and Company. The design that's in front of you would be the design that they came up with. It sort of takes a little bit of the architectural of the existing B Street station along with the properties on the state fairgrounds with the green roofs that coincide with the fairgrounds. This building will make major changes to the operational plan of the City of Hutchinson and the Hutchinson Fire Department for the community. The station, we will be moving a truck company from 4th and Halstead will be coming up to this station due to this is our busiest station in the City of Hutchinson. The property that we currently exist under at 20th and Main, the new property will become just south of Skates Restaurant at 23rd and Main Street in that open lot there. And so with that being said, here last week we finally got to go out to bid with a project. And we were very surprised. We had 7 bidders for this project, which was great to see. And even more exciting than that, the low bid came actually by one of our local construction companies in town here, Weens Construction, and Sid's here today with that. And you see the price there, which was in your packet. Part of that construction bid came down into these numbers. We had some alternatives in there, and we sat here in the last few days making additional cuts out of that number, out of the 4.8. And that really removed a ticket booth cover. One of the things we have to do is demo the existing ticket booth for the state fair up on the corner of 23rd and Main Street. And we got to rebuild one of them. I sort of take that as a sort of like us buying the property almost from the state fair. If we would have to go out and find land, we would probably have to remove probably 5 residential properties somewhere at extreme cost. And so one of the exchange and the agreements that we talked about was the city and us working, since we're demoing it and there's $0 on the lease agreement, that we would replace our ticket booth. And then we took out alternative number 2 out of the equation. We deleted that, and the extension for the concrete here on 23rd Avenue was a recommendation from our city engineering firms. In addition to that, we had some internal costs here that you can see here that come up with from the demo of the existing station to contingency to art to supplying the station with turnout gear lockers, kitchen appliances, other equipment. Sums up to $306,000.
Is the contingency budget, that 100,000, is that for the entire 4.8 million?
Yes, that
Okay.
is. We originally had $250,000 contingency, and we cut that down to $100,000
Okay.
For the entire process. In addition to that, you'll see all the architectural fees here, from civil to planning to engineering fees, that bring the total project cost to 5.2. One of the things that you need to be aware about too is that this project was, it's almost been 2 years ago when the budget numbers were put together in this process here. And so even though we're a little bit over budget, I have the Manning Company here, Sid's here. These are the professionals in their area. They're here to answer any of your questions today. And I think that's all the slides I have for you.
We budgeted 5 million?
4.5.
Oh,
4.5.
4.5.
So we're about $800,000 over
It's
budget.
about, is Angela here? Angela's here. Maybe you want to just talk, we talked about yesterday.
So per year, that origin amounts to about 46,000 of extra bond payments. We could afford that the first year. We have enough in our bond and interest fund to cover that additional if we bonded it. We could also try to look at bonding it over 25 years instead of 20, but I'm not sure that that'll really net you much savings per year.
Yeah.
So we could handle it, and then looking at the CIP in 2023, we would probably reduce the amount that we bond then. So.
And can you remind me what the other 2 stations cost? I was thinking they were closer to 2.5.
I think you're right.
I think you're pretty close there, but
I
This
think
is
you're
double,
pretty
over
close.
double
I
the
did not
cost.
do that.
Okay. Okay.
this
Thank you.
concept here too is a totally different concept here. One of the recommendations that I talked to you guys earlier about from the accreditation firm to our existing fire stations, we have to put on turnout gear locker rooms and like laundry rooms that were never put on to the existing stations. This station has that all covered. This station will house a truck company, an engine company, and a battalion chief. In addition to be the city's hazmat team response area, and will be home to 3 brush trucks that will respond out of this station. It'll have our air compressor room that no other station has either. There's a laundry room, like I said. It'll have the gear. It's almost designed under a hazmat concept. One of the things that we talked about, which none of our other stations have either, is that I talked to you about the cancer in the fire service. And the apparatus room going into the living quarters is almost like a cold zone walking into a hot zone. And so all the byproducts of combustion, all the stuff is meant to stay out on the apparatus floor. And everything, when you walk into the living quarters, offices, is totally clean, free from any contaminants. None of our other stations are designed under that concept. In addition to this, the station will have a primal vent system where diesel exhaust is extracted from the building as the trucks pull out and start up. That was one of the big things that we had to add in after the fact at the other stations. And so this station that's already built into the contract for the safety of our firefighters also.
Got a question for you, Chief. Being that I was a traffic signal technician before, are you going to preemption the lights when you come out of there for the fire?
Yes, I believe the engineering department, along with Brian's division, or Jeff's division, they do have a plan going on that project already, and they're actually identified, I think some of the Main Street corridor already, is what my understanding is.
But they'll turn all red when you guys have a fire coming out?
Well, we'll get the green light. It's a 3-year project.
Okay.
Was in the CIP for under the engineering, I believe.
Okay.
And so they have certain streets that they're prioritizing, and I believe Main Street is the one that they're actually starting, actually this year.
So the preemptions are on the fire trucks, and also when they come out of the station, they turn the preemption on, correct?
Yeah, actually, it's we can set it by how many feet we want the preemptions
Correct.
to go off of. It's all driven by GPS. And so as a fire truck comes into an intersection, 3,000 feet before that, the green light will come on, the green arrow will come on, and it'll clear all the traffic out. And so fire truck comes through the intersection, they don't even have to stop. They can
Right.
go and continue. And we anticipate increased response time or decreased response times with that preemption.
How much do you estimate that this being over budget has to do with the inflation of parts and material?
And I'll just sit and to you guys have a better handle on construction costs than I do.
Sid Weens and Company Construction. We've seen, in your questions, it's hard to quantify
Yeah.
specifically, but we've seen significant, in the last 2 years, significant increases in pretty much everything, whether it's probably the least is concrete, but it's gone up as well. Steel prices have gone up tremendously. Steel affects everything from light gauge framing to structural metal buildings. Availability has actually been difficult with some steel products. Paper products, so drywall, ceiling tile, things like that have climbed quite a bit. So, and of course wood. So, anything to do with fuels. My answer to that question is, over the last 2 years, between 20 and 30% is kind of just a broad brush. 15 to 30 maybe, depending on the type of building, that sort of thing. So, and laborers in shorter supply. So.
I just have Lynn Schwarzkopf, Manning Company Architects, 67502. I just have one comment about some of the research I did on this, and one was to look at RS Means costs, and that is kind of what has happened in the marketplace for buildings over the last 2.5 years. RS Means has one picture of a fire station, and you flip the page for the next year, same picture of the same fire station. You flip it for the next year, same picture, same fire station. If you look at the increase in costs for 2.5 years, it's about 18%. If you look at it for just 1 year, at 2022, John, to 2021, that was about 11% cost. So we did seven fire stations for it. They all came in on budget. But we have a lot different set of circumstances now. Sid mentioned steel prices, which is, they've really gone up, and guess what we have in our building? Steel roof, light gauge steel studs, bar joist steel in the concrete. The little ticket booth, I think that's one thing we could really take a look at, because that one was like, it's just a little 320 square foot building, and that came in at $100,000, although it's got quite a bit of detail in it. So, there are some things that we can take a look at, but right now I think time is of the essence, because right now the suppliers are saying, here's your quote, it's good for 24 hours.
Mhm.
And so it was good for 24 hours, you know, and you've got, what, an order for $400,000 worth of steel online. Well, you know, it's two things. You might be waiting on that steel. What do you think?
Yeah, decking is probably out to October.
So really, you know, they have to concentrate on that. The thing as I see it, and Sid may disagree, but we get our site work done, we get all those off-site utilities done, we've got a drainage system that goes straight to Talbot. That's really cool because we're taking water and we're having to fill up the lake there. That's a neat little deal. We do have to do a water treatment on that to get that done. The other thing we have that's really, really expensive, it's 3 times what we thought would be, we have to put an 8-inch line to get to sewer that's on site because we have to go to a lower slope on that. So what we thought would be about 20 ends up being about 60 or 70. Those are just examples of how fast things are going up right now. So,
Yeah.
Chief,
I think it's about 16% over budget right now.
So I
from 2 years
think it's
ago.
right in line for
Yeah.
what we'd expect. And of course, if you look at that budget, you can see we've got an emergency generator in there, we've got a vehicle exhaust, we've got a station alert system, a lot of data. We've got the furniture and equipment is in that, the appliances are in that. So Mark and Doug and Chief did a really good job of identifying all those costs and getting them in the budget because a lot of times those are the things that get left out. So
Then you buy them later on.
Yeah, exactly right. You probably get them committed, but you can buy those later on. I think the thing that I guess would be critical on this too, if we could get this man under contract so we can get everything ordered, because if you would, let's say 12%, or 16%, that's a 1.5% per month. I don't know how long that's going to go on, but it could go. You know, it could continue after COVID. Who knows how quick supply is going to catch up with that demand?
Yeah.
So anyway, you can see we were really nervous about this
100,000
one.
though for the ticket booth? No. I won't pick on
Yeah.
that, but
All
if you
right.
could revisit that.
Yeah, okay. Very good.
Yeah, I think we're committed to getting this done, and I
Yeah.
don't want to put it out further, but I also think we're flush with cash right now, and so we're making decisions based on that reality, where, like, why are we spending $144,000 on a ticket booth that literally was like a wooden shack,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And we're required to rebuild that. Great.
But
At the cost of a small home? I mean, it was
Yeah.
a wooden shack,
yeah,
you know? So I think, again,
I would like that to be revisited.
yeah.
I feel like
Absolutely.
that could be
We'll do
something
that,
that
do
we put that in an
That was
amendment.
just-
and
Yeah.
I'll just finish the story on that, but that's a shell building with no heating, no air conditioning, no plumbing, and just very little, you know, very, very little finishing on the inside. So do the math on that. $100, $100,000 for 300, that's $320. And it's not Sid's fault, it's probably ours. We, you know, what we did was we tried to make it look just like that. So I think what we can do is we will do some looking at that, see if we can come up with better. Now, Mark, you might tell them just a little bit about that portico there. We should have had a line item of that to start with, and
Yeah,
I don't know,
they
you
took it out.
saved it out, so, okay. So
My
that's
name, my name is Mark Schwarzkopf with Manning Company Architects, 67501. And I think we don't have a picture of the proposed ticket booth, but we wanted to make it look nice. We didn't necessarily want to make it look like the one at 23rd and Poplar, I think.
Yeah.
Just kind of a shack out there. We wanted to match in with the station with a nice brick veneer, and it does have some detailing on it that ticket booth number 9 has. The main one over by Bogies, you know, has a nice metal roof on it with little dormers and a little cupola on top. So those are the little details that drive the price up of the
Yeah.
little building.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I mean, I, for one, am really excited that we have a local contractor and architects that we're able to, you know, do this project. I'm very excited about that. I do not want to further encumber future bond and interest levies with an additional, $46,000 a year, because that really impacts our CIP. If there's a way we can find to take some kind of reserves, I would be more comfortable with that. I don't know how the rest of the council feels, and that's probably not a discussion for today, or is it? Are we voting on the actual bonding or just the? Okay.
I think we need to get Mr. Weens started.
Mm-hmm.
And what I like about having Mr. Weens and everyone in the group being local is they all know that at the end of the day, they're part of the people paying the price for the project.
Yeah. Reduces those change orders.
Tries to.
I will note that it is a 16%.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not huge. I
Yeah.
think that is something that I'd like the public to know that it's
But I'm not willing to increase our property taxes by 16% for everything
I
that is
know, but
increasing
this
16%. Yeah.
This is something we're gonna see coming up a lot. So this statement isn't particularly to the fire station right now, but it is 16%, but that's the reality of what we are all facing coming up in budget season, especially in the next 3 or 4 years, because the government printed out so much money and they just flooded the market with tons of money. I mean, it's something like 60% of all money that's been printed that's circulating now happened in the last 2 years. It's huge amount that has been. So we are going to suffer with inflation, and we just don't know how bad it's going to be. And that's going to come down to our budgets. And so I think as a council people, our what we really have to work on now is how do we keep the mill levy where it's at? Because we're going to be more competitive with surrounding cities by keeping the mill levy level, because everybody else is going to have to raise their mill levy because of costs of everything is going to be going up. I think we need to move forward with this because we've kicked the can along for 7 years, and the cost has definitely gone up in the last 7 years. And I don't see the cost coming down anytime soon. If not, I feel, unfortunately, it's going to get worse.
I too want to move forward. I do want to correct you. We have not kicked the can. In 2015, we approved 3 new stations.
Yeah.
We never had any intention of building them in the same year. That would be absurd. We wanted to bond one every, I think, 2 years. So it was always the plan to replace 3 stations, but not in the course of one budget cycle. So I'm excited we're moving forward. Is there a motion or further discussion on this item?
Motion to accept the low base bid from Weens Construction and authorize the mayor to sign.
I'll second that.
Okay, any discussion from the audience? Further comments? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Garza.
Yes.
Bass.
Yes.
Bagwell.
Yes.
Richardson.
Yes.
Harris Nicovello.
Yes, thank you.
I have one clarification.
Yeah.
I think the base bid is not the total price of the project. Is that what we're looking at here? The 5.2?
I don't think the alternatives were included in the motion.
The alternatives were not included in the motion. Sorry. I just read it. I thought it was all included.
Base bid and alternates, I think is the way it ought to be worded.
The proposed alternates.
The proposed alternates with the architectural
Can you
fees.
bring it up, please, and I'll
They
redo
wanna
the
get paid?
motion. Yeah.
Right there, 5275, and then we look at
The slide with the alternates, can you bring that up, please?
Because some of those alternates were struck out, so.
yeah. It's this number plus architectural fees that gets you the base bid.
Keep going to the next. There was another slide I'm looking for. Thank you. The ticket booth. So I'm gonna say motion to accept the low base bid from Weens Construction plus alternate 3. And
we have to rebuild.
Reconsideration for alternate 1.
We have to rebuild the ticket booth. It's part
Yeah.
of the lease with the Kansas State
Yes.
Fair.
I'm not gonna strike
Yeah.
it, but reconsideration of alternative, with reconsideration of alternative 1.
1, 3, these costs here, along with the architectural fees, come out to that number right there. That's your
Okay.
16%. with taking a look at the ticket booth reduction and the construction of it, or whatever you guys can come up with.
Yes, with the
on that.
approval of the additional costs as well.
What we might do on that, since you're approving that like it is if we are able to save 50,000, we'll write a deduct change order for 50,000 and apply it to the contingency or give it back to the
Okay.
bond, whatever you want to do with that.
Okay. Yeah, you don't see those
Alright.
sort of change orders very often.
I mean, you can do it, you approve it like it is, they can, and we can save
Okay.
50,000.
All right.
We just encourage any kind of reverse engineering you can do to
Can
bring
I
that.
ask you to?
Hang on. Council,
Really
let me stop you
nebulous,
here.
Sid, really nebulous.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, council, but let me stop you here. We need a number. We need a number. You can't just approve it, well, it's kind of this and that.
Let's
We need a number.
Okay.
not to exceed
Not to
$5,275,364.
Well, that's as
Should be the
is.
number.
They didn't,
Not to exceed
I
that.
will say that you did not write any of this. All this extra is not provided here. Okay. Motion to accept the low base bid, alternative 1, alternative 3, and the extra costs for the amount not to exceed $5275,364 for Means Construction. Authorize the mayor to sign.
Okay, I second that. I just want to make sure.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. Please call the roll.
Garza.
Yes.
Faust.
Yes.
Bagwell.
Yes.
Richardson.
Yes.
Pyrus-Dick-Rollo.
Yes, and before we move to the next item, we're going to take a 10-minute break, so we will reconvene at 10:56. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I mean, we talk a good game, but we didn't change anything. I mean,
I know.
consider 2022 Historic Preservation Fund grant support letter.
Good morning, Ryan Vietlich, Director of Planning and Development. Just a quick item before you this morning. This is a request for a grant support letter for the 2022 Historic Preservation Fund grant program through the Kansas Historical Society. This grant program is a grant program that CLGs, or certified local governments, they get priority for. This program can be used for a variety of different historic type work. Typically with doing, in the past we have done educational things. That is what the city got a grant for, to do the preservation calculator, the tool that's on the website. We have gotten 17 of these grants over the years, and we've done some great things. We've done surveys for Houston Whiteside, downtown, the fairgrounds. We've done some educational work with some of our local schools. This grant's application is to do a preservation and reuse plan of Memorial Hall. This is an item that is in your 2023 CIP that the city council has tentatively set aside about $50,000 for. This grant request is for $25,000. The great part about this is because we have the money kind of already tentatively set aside in the capital improvement plan, that we are able to, if the project is not as expensive as we think it is, we won't have to spend as much out of our capital improvement funds. So the only requirement for the grant is that we have to provide a 40% match. So if we're getting $25,000, we only have to provide 40% of that $25,000 in order to do that. That being said, we do believe that this project will be between $50,000 and $75,000. The intent of it is to look at a reuse plan for Memorial Hall on how we can, how the community can use the building more often. Currently, right now, it's only able to be really used in the cooler months because of the lack of air conditioning. Because of that, because of the lack of rental income, the city is not able to see its full potential. And so this is a request that would provide funding to do a plan. We wanted to make sure it's done through the Historical Society to ensure that the historical character of the building is respected and maintained. If we just went out and just did a typical reuse plan, our concern is that the consultant may not have as much familiarity with historical buildings and the unique characteristics of those. So this grant would be to hire a consultant, one that is familiar with historic preservation, historic buildings, and they would be the ones that would look at this to do a reuse plan. It would be a very public-facing component. We'd have at least one open house where we would invite the public to give us feedback on what they want to see with the building, what their concerns are with the building. We would have a steering committee. We would ask at least one member of the city council to probably sit on that, as well as a couple of members of the Landmarks Commission to direct the consultant's work. So this would be one of the requirements of it is to get a support letter from the community. We have already received one from the Landmarks Commission, and this would just be a request for one from the city council. With that, staff's happy to answer questions you all may have.
Mayor, if I might, I asked Ryan to bring this in front of the governing body instead of going the administrative route on it, because while this study is very proactive and in keeping with the historic nature of the building, I can assure you this is not going to come back and show you a roadmap for saving money or reducing your mill or lessening your impact on revenue and other dollars. Certainly air conditioning is going to come in and be one of the biggest factors that limits the use of that building. It's about $1.5 million, $1.2 million just for AC in that building. So if you do this, and I'm not saying it's a bad idea to do it, just let it come with the expectation that even with grant support, this will be a quite expensive endeavor. And your heart will really have to be into the preservation aspect of the building to philosophically support this later on.
Yeah, this grant would be just for the plan. It would not be for any But the good part of it is that once we have this plan, we'll have a roadmap of what needs to be done, and then we can actually go out and look for additional sources of funding. One of the unique possibilities is, because it's a historic building, that we could possibly get historical tax credits, which can help offset that cost a little bit. There are some additional ways, but really until we do a plan, it's going to be difficult for us to know exactly what is out there. We were encouraged by the state to apply for this. The state has quite a bit of funds this year for this, and we have not received one. Our most recent one was 2016, so I won't say we're due for a grant, because you're never due for grants, but that is something that the state does take into account. So we think it's important. It's something that both the Landmarks Commission and the City Council have shown some support for, in that it is part of the historic action plan that was approved by the Landmarks Commission for 2021 through 2023. So, but yes, the city manager is correct that this is going to be a plan that's probably going to show a roadmap of additional improvements that will need to be made to the building. I did include in the application, and I included it for you all to review as well, is we do track the spending we spend on Memorial Hall. And it is one of these things that, because we are only able to rent it for a few months a year, that we are seeing a deficit on an annual basis. And so the hope is that and you can't guarantee anything, but the hope is that if you can get this building where it can actually be used year round, you might actually begin to change that number a little bit, and maybe we won't run a deficit for Memorial Hall. So,
Ryan, could the result of the study show that a recommendation that it be turned over to the private sector for some use? I mean, would the uses be limited to those in kind of the public realm, or?
It's kind of all open. We're not going into this with any preconceived notions. We just do know that one of the major things that will probably come out is the lack of air conditioning. But yeah, certainly we will use the open house and the public input to kind of guide where the plan actually goes. And one of those questions I'm sure will come up is it really the city's place anymore to really be owning this building, or can the private sector maybe do a more efficient, effective job with it?
Okay. And what's the cost of this study?
So we have reached out to consultants, and we have gotten numbers anywhere from between about $50,000 and $75,000. So the CIP has $50,000 programmed. If we got this grant, we'd have $25,000. So we'd have up to $75,000. But as I mentioned, let's say the project comes in at only $60,000. Well, then we would only be on the hook for I'm gonna do my math here real quick in my head, $35,000. So as long as we meet that 40% match of that $25,000, we're okay. So a bare minimum would be that 40% of $25,000 that the city would be on the hook for. So.
I'd like to see it done. I know that it was identified in the Parks and Rec Master Plan as one facility that would need its own plan to determine the best use. Right now, it's just a drain on our budget. Would like to see if it could be better utilized. I know we've made efforts in the past, or other city councils have, to try to deed it over for concerts or, promoters, and some of those things just haven't worked because of its limitations. So I'm in favor of this project. And
could the study be used to market it to the private sector as something that's available on the property?
That's the hope, that there might be something that comes out of a marketability aspect of, at least, what are some things that the city or potentially a private owner could do to actually market the building. So that will be part of it as well, yes.
Okay, that's what I was interested in, if there was basically like supporting documents to help market it.
That's the hope. One of the things we will have created will be kind of an executive summary of the plan, because we anticipate this will be a fairly in-depth plan. But yeah, the hope is that we'll have an executive summary that we'll be able to utilize with the chamber and things like that as they try to market the space as well.
Okay.
So.
I think the structure was slated for demolition in the 80s or early 90s, when a group of residents rallied and forced a referendum to keep Memorial Hall, or I guess it was
Absolutely.
Convention Hall when I was growing up, so.
Well, I will say there's some renewed interest in it, I think, with the growth and the interest in our downtown. I know tomorrow morning I have a meeting at 8 o'clock with some different developers and some fundraising people about downtown specifically, and I have a letter before me from a guy that does production work in California that actually lives in Hutchinson, that has expressed interest in it. And to your point, there's been some promoters, and you know,
I know Salina, their Memorial Hall, for example, they're in the process of looking to redevelop it more for, they're calling it more the esports type look, but yes, there has been some interest. I have sat in on some meetings with the Community Foundation and with the chamber as well as, so yeah, we certainly believe the interest is out there, but I think that sticking point is, I think anybody no matter who owns the building probably wants to know what they're getting into in terms of really to make it a usable space again. And so our hope is that this plan, with the support of this grant, will at least facilitate those conversations.
Hasn't there been a study on this building before? This is not the first time, if I remember right.
I am not aware if there's actually been a full study that's been done on it. I know the biggest work was the referendum, which directed the city to preserve the building, but did not direct the city to do any additional major work. We did get a grant, I believe around 2010, to fix some windows and do some roofing and stuff like that. So we've gotten some grants to kind of help move things along, but yeah, we really do need, the time is now that we probably need to have this conversation of what the community wants to see happen with this building, so.
Is there a motion on this item?
I'll make the motion to approve and authorize the mayor to sign and authorize
A support letter.
the support letter for the 2002 Historic Preservation Fund grant.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion and a second. Further discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Garza,
Yes.
Bass,
Yes.
Bagwell,
Yes.
Richardson,
Yes.
Tyrus Cavallo.
Yes.
Thank you.
Next item, please. Thank you, Ryan.
Item 8D, consider bid results for Zoo Nature Play Project.
Good morning, Justin Combs, Director of Parks and Facilities. So this project is for the bid results for the Nature Play project. We've talked about a few times over the past several years. Just to give you a little bit of lay of the land and background on the project, this is the otter exhibit right here where I have my highlighter. This expansion or this new play area would be right in this zone here, and I will show you exactly what the idea is for that area. And then also, if you remember, several weeks ago we approved the bison viewing exhibit, which is down here in this corner. And so this development really is a connecting link from the zoo to the bison, as well as provides really a great opportunity for some additional an additional experience at the zoo. Just going back to the original thought and idea, so this was a concept we had done in 2018, somewhere in that time frame. So here's the otter exhibit as well, just for reference. The original budget you can see on the left, it's a $300,000 budget. It's a 50-50 match. Land Water Conservation Fund, which is federal funds. $75,000 then from the Zoo Reserve, and $75,000 were privately fundraised by Friends of the Zoo. In my memo, I did indicate that funding into the Zoo Reserve is primarily revenue generated by Friends of the Zoo. So this isn't necessarily tax dollars. This is really revenue that we've generated internally. So now moving on to the actual plan. Really, it is think of it as an interactive stream or an interactive splash pad. So it'll be treated water just like a splash pad, a few inches deep, and then we'll have this natural look. So it'll be colored concrete with natural stones and then we'll have this kind of this natural curve to it. It will range in depth from, or width, I guess, from about 5 feet. Right in here is a narrow spot into, I think this is 12 or 13 feet across here. So just to give you an idea of the overall design. And here's the same image, just a little bit closer up. From kind of the head point to the foot in a straight line, we're about 80 feet. The total length of stream is a little over 110 feet. So just to put it in perspective. But this water will be treated. It'll have a pump and filtration system just like any splash pad. The idea is that anyone can come and play in this on a hot summer day. We can also use it for nature interpretation, so we can host classes out there. As far as how do streams move, how can you manipulate water, how can you build a dam. We'll have objects like small stones and sticks that kids can play with as the water moves. I also want to point out that this will be ADA compliant, so this is all level through here. And these two rocks right here are actually a ADA transfer point, so somebody in a wheelchair can transfer to this larger stone and then transfer to the smaller stone and then transfer down onto the actual floor of the interactive stream. Bid results, we had one bidder, Ward Davis Builders here from Hutch. You can see his base bid. Alternate one was to add, so these rocks that have little rings around them, the idea with those would be bubblers, so there'd be a hole in that rock and then water would come up out of the rock. And so alternate one was for the first bubbler, because that first bubbler will include all the pumping equipment and then the piping to the bubbler. And then alternate two was for each additional. The first one's more expensive because it has the pump. So my recommendation and then funding and cost breakdown. So as you can see here, still $150,000 from Land and Water Conservation, $75,000 from the Zoo Reserve. Also, you'll notice this number has jumped from $75,000 to $95,000. Meaning Friends of the Zoo has committed to an additional $20,000 in fundraising. And I'm also recommending $57,000 transfer from the general fund. That would be a maximum number. In my memo also indicated, I've talked with Ward Davis about some potential negative change orders. We've already got a few ideas. So that would be an absolute maximum from the general fund. I'm bringing the total to $377,920. And here you can just see a breakdown that also includes the design fee that was approved about a year ago. So it is my recommendation to proceed with Ward Davis Builders for amount not to exceed $352,420. I do want to note in my memo I have the 2 and 4 transposed, but this is the correct amount. It's written 2 different ways in your memo, so that is my mistake. But it's 420, not 240, as you'll see in the memo. So, with that, I will stay for any questions.
I think when we originally voted for this, it was just for the 75,000 and the funds, and now you're asking for 50,000 more out of the general. Correct. Than what was originally discussed. And
correct.
So this concept, and I'm just being mean because I think everybody knows how I feel about the zoo. If the zoo got converted into something that wasn't a zoo, this could still be utilized?
Yes.
As a play area or an alternative?
Yeah. The goal of this is to increase the stay of a visit at the zoo without adding new exhibits and new animals and new tasks to our zookeepers.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is there any way to... Can you go back to the one before? I mean the numbers page, sorry. Yes, that page, thank you. do you see potential cost saving where you can get it down to where we're not having to transfer the 57,920 from the general fund
I
to
don't
cover this?
I don't think we can get it that far down. I think my initial conversations with Ward were closer to the 15 to 20 or 10 to $20,000 range. It would come off of that 57,000.
What about without? And is that without the alternates, or is that with?
That
the
is
alternates?
without. That is no
That
alternates.
was no alternate.
One thing that I would most likely do, even if we do it with in-house staff, is put in the plumbing. So if we do want to add a bubbler at some point, we don't have to tear out concrete. We've already got a
Yeah.
conduit back to the pump. So.
Justin, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but what I'm seeing is a nearly $400,000 project with less than 15% public investment. This is almost fully private
Correct.
generated
Yes.
for an outstanding amenity for children all over the community to use at no cost.
Absolutely. Yep.
Sounds amazing. Sign me up. Cannot believe how the Friends of the Zoo have stepped up to the table to do that level of fundraising. That's incredible. Really commend them.
And this is in addition to the bison viewing, which is just kind of the connection piece between the two as well, which is, what's their commitment there, 80, 75,000, somewhere in that for the bison viewing.
Yeah. Fantastic. Additional comments, questions?
What's the timeline on this?
So we have to move pretty quick. So grant funds have to be spent by end of September. So we have to have substantial completion by the end of September. I've walked through that timeline with Ward. He's comfortable that we can get there. The steel in it is going to be the most challenging piece from a time frame. Most of it's concrete.
The only problem I got with this is that our pool needs a lot of repairs, and we're spending this much money in the zoo. This is where the kids can have something to do at the zoo, correct? Am I right?
Correct.
And it's a learning technique too, right?
Yes.
And we're spending this kind of money. That's the first thing comes to mind. I know I'm gonna have a lot of calls on we spend this kind of money at the zoo, which I can see why it's needed, but then again, our pools need a lot of repairs too.
Yeah, the pool issue is a much larger animal
I know.
To tackle. It's very, very common to see people bleed over between the two facilities. So to see kids in swimsuits with towels at the zoo as they go back and forth between the two facilities. The other thing with this, because we don't have big spray features, you don't necessarily have to get soaking wet in this. So even on a nice day where you maybe don't want to get completely wet, kid could still kick off their shoes and play in this if it's maybe too cool to get completely wet. Or we can have the educational programs as well. So it's not just, don't just think about this as those really warm months. I mean, this is something that can be open, 6+ months out of the year.
Are there plans to use this during colder months when the water's not being? Is this an outdoor classroom when the water feature is not operating?
We would not be able to use it below freezing. So we have to, there still be a time in the spring and fall that we could operate it much longer than we would operate our pool or something like that. So.
And Steve, just to clarify, even though the amount is not to exceed 352, only 57,000 is coming from the city coffers. So
It's just that our taxpayers would see it different. I understand it, and I agree with you, Jade. This is one of the zoo helps pay their own way, so I understand it. But I start thinking about that. Our pools need a lot of repairs, and even though we're spending 57,000, even that, I just had to let that out because that's what I'm thinking. Citizens would think. So
I do want to go back to your question. While the water isn't going to be running in really cool temperatures, we could still use it as an education opportunity. So our education staff, I'm sure, would use it. Even though the water's not running, we've already have ideas to stamp in some footprints of animals that you would see in Kansas along the stream. So there's still opportunities there. People can. We're not going to close it down and rope it off, so you can still play on it.
And unlike back to the pool discussion and the other splash pads, the cost of maintaining this, filters, pumps from here on out, is that going to be split, or how's that going to? What's the plan?
So we will wrap that in with the rest of our splash pads. So we do a large chemical order every year for all of our chemicals. The splash pads take very little compared to the pool, so there will be a slight cost there. Also, we do have to check these every day, and so we have a staff member now who checks our 3 other splash pads, so this one will just be added to their list to make sure that the chemical levels are appropriate, those sorts of things. So it's not necessarily a maintenance issue for the zoo, more of the staff that on the maintenance side that on things we're already doing. So.
I know that we it is a fairly small amount of money from the city for this particular project compared to the grant and the reserve, which is also city. So you have to realize it's 75,000 is the city and the 57.9 is the city. I do understand that most of it is coming from the grant and then the zoo reserve, but we also spend, I think with the zoo is now almost to $900,000 a year at the zoo. I think
That's not
we're
the
at
subsidy,
800
though.
and, huh?
That's not fully subsidized.
So yes, there is some revenue that doesn't necessarily show up in the budget in the tune of between $100,000 and $150,000 annually that goes directly to the Friends of the Zoo and their support of the zoo. So things like the capital improvements, things like they pay for 1 full-time staff member. Those numbers don't show up. That revenue doesn't show up. They do support us in those ways. So the $900,000 is what's in the budget, but that doesn't include the
revenue.
The 150. So we're still talking about $700,000 a year in expense. Correct. Now, what I do like about this is because I believe it's something that we should move towards with the zoo. I believe that the zoo became an educational park with features that weren't necessarily animal, like something where we can move into newer times. You know, I mean, zoos and stuff like that are becoming draconian. I've said it before. And moving this into more technology-based educational park about animals that would just be kind of upfront cost with maintenance going long-term, so you don't have to have as much staff, you don't have to have the care for the animals, and you don't have all of that. That's something that I would love to see. I know I'm probably the only one, but I've been preaching a long time that we should have an educational park and not necessarily a zoo, because the zoo is very expensive and have a zoo director is very expensive on staff. But because it's not adding extra animals, it's not adding that type of, that's something I actually agree with, that I think we should move more forward with that particular space and have it downgraded from a zoo to an educational park. That's the only reason why I'm actually probably going to vote yes this time.
Actually, probably.
Yeah.
I appreciate your comments about not adding, because that's something we're very, very aware of, not adding additional animals into our collection at this point. We understand that our staff is already fully taxed.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to extend the visit, and then maybe we can have that conversation about a gate fee at some point. As of right now, we add this piece, we add the bison viewing, we're getting closer to where there's enough value there that we can and start charging some sort of gate fee and start recovering more of that cost up front. But we are very conscious of not adding more to do for our staff that we have.
I know that USD 308 is going to get about $8.5 million to spend due to the pandemic. It's their version of ARPA funds. And to your point, Sarah, some of that might be used to help the zoo. I think maybe if the Friends of the Zoo would visit with Sheila Meggers at USD 308 a little bit about that, we might be able to move that direction.
Well, I will plant one seed. I'm very interested in the conversation that happens tonight about that process for the ARPA funds as well, not just the 308 money.
Well, this has nothing to do, it does, of course it has something to do with our conversation, but it is a separate pot of money that USD 308 is going to get that has to be spent in 2 years. And for educational type things to catch people up in different ways of educating virtually. So might be a way to help the zoo.
The gears are always turning with the zoo staff. They've always got lots of ideas that are very much in line with looking at what the community needs, looking at available funding. So lots of ideas are being generated that are exciting, and things are ideas that you will hear hopefully very soon. So.
Great.
I'm ready to make a motion. Okay. I would move to accept the bid from Ward Davis Builders for the Zoo Nature Play Project for an amount not to exceed $352,420 and authorize the mayor to sign all associated documents.
And did you still say you're gonna work on trying to save that 15,000?
Absolutely. Yep.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Okay, motion and a second. Further discussion? Comments from the audience? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Garza,
Yes.
Fast,
Yes.
Bagwell,
Yes.
Richardson.
Yes.
Forrester Carvalho.
Yes, next item, please.
Item 8E, consider arterial street maintenance project.
Good morning. Almost good afternoon, Council. Today I'm bringing the bid results for the arterial street maintenance project. This project will mill off the existing asphalt surface on Severance Street from 23rd to 30th and 23rd from Severance to Waldron. The streets were selected using a combination of the pavement condition index and maintenance costs. The section of the road scheduled for two sections of road scheduled for maintenance this year are being postponed until next year due to conflict with nearby projects. This will result in a larger project next year. We also have some other arterial work that's being placed later this year. On Tuesday, March 29th, the city received 2 bids for this project. The engineer's estimate was $730,000. The approved budget was $1.667 million, and the low bid was $504,102. The engineering department recommends the city council approve the low bid by Pearson Construction and authorize the mayor to sign the construction contract in the amount of $504,102.
How did that happen?
Is the project smaller, did you say? You took some of the stuff out than what we budgeted for?
So we have the 11th Avenue bridges being reconstructed this year, and the detour routes were the routes that we were going to mill and overlay. And so we didn't want to put traffic into a mill and overlay section. So
And
we
how
decided
much
to push it to
was
next
the
year.
projected cost of that? So that we can kind of put in perspective what we approved and what we're getting.
I don't have the projected cost of that.
Well, wasn't it
we were just around the $1.667 million before we took it out. I mean, it's 4th Avenue was one of the sections, and it's a long section.
So we're not getting like a big old, woo, we're
but
saving
next year,
600,000. I just wanted to point that out to the public. We still have work to do that costs money.
We have $100,000 still going in chip seal. We have another estimated right around $250,000 that's going to be done on 17th near the K61 intersection this year.
Okay.
Plus then we have the 2 detour routes that were taken out of this year's project. Will be put into next year. So next year, our request will be for more than was budgeted because we'll have the leftover funds from this year.
Okay.
Sorry for the outburst.
Motion to approve the low bid for Pearson Construction in the amount of $504,102 and authorize the mayor to sign all associated documents.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Further discussion? I had one item. I've gotten some questions in the past on our local preference policy. I believe that's 5%. Is that correct? If a local company comes within 5% of the low bid, we can award it to the local company?
I thought we don't have that no more in streets.
Or did we, that was my question, did we eliminate streets from that?
That was eliminated, yes.
Okay.
I believe some of the infrastructure parts were eliminated from it on the larger projects. Because there was a discussion about keeping out-of-town interests when you only have 2 bidders bidding.
Okay. Thank you. Please call the roll.
Garza,
Yes, though
Fast,
Yes, I do think we need to look at that though, because I've had a lot of questions from APAC.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Fast,
Yes.
Bagwell,
Yes.
Richardson,
Yes.
Pyrus Corolla.
Yes, next item, please.
Item 8F, discussion of stormwater utility.
Thank you, Mayor. This is an item that we were going to try to squeeze into a separate work session. I'm sure you guys remember that. Thank you all for accommodating us and allowing us to discuss this today. It eliminates the need for a whole separate future meeting, we think. If this goes through like we have practiced, we can keep it under 3 hours. I'm kidding, but we can shorten it up a lot if we save questions till the end. And you're going to see three of us discussing this as we go along. I'm going to jump in for a few minutes. I think you'll then see Angela explain some of the revenue forecasts and the budget liabilities associated with some projects that have been identified. And then Jeff's going to run us through some of the very specifics related to known projects and then the frequency of unknown projects, things that you've heard of previously like Mine Road and Cow Creek project, things like that. To give you kind of a 30,000-foot view from my perspective, someone not having a historic lens for this, having to go back and do a lot of research just to find out exactly what the city did do, allow me 4 or 5 minutes to run through some of that. A committee was put together, and it did include a significant number of large commercial property owners that were most potentially impacted by this fee. That group then made recommendations to the governing body after studying what other cities charge, what some of the other regional activity is with this, and came up with a strategy that would fall kind of in what I would call the Buick or Chevrolet area, not a Mercedes, it was mid-range. So that's where we came up with the ERU number. And what we have found, and what Jeff has provided, is verification that quite a few other cities have this. They're progressive enough to put this into their CIP programming for elimination of very expensive projects that have the tendency to flood people. But we are in the mid-range regionally, fee-wise, of the cities that impose such a fee. Now, other cities wait till things go really bad sometimes. They use geodebt, they'll use specials, they'll tell a developer, well, if you want to develop this portion of the city, we're gonna saddle you with a series of special assessments potentially so that you can fix this, because now you're going to impact it. And this is a slightly different way of doing it, but that is how some cities choose to do it. Mr. Garza, I think you said it most clearly a couple months ago. And as I studied this, I reflected on that, and you were right. You said, guys, there are a lot of things that these fees pertain to and positions that they support and operations. And you weren't wrong. There are quite a few of them. It impacts numerous positions that handle maintenance, scheduled projects, unscheduled projects. Even when you see the street sweeper go by, a portion of that street sweeper is funded through this. When we get the ever famous phone calls, guys, where someone says, my curb's bad, come replace it. And of course, we don't plan for that, in 80-foot increments. But when we go out and we find that it's bad enough to be put on the list, this is what pays for that. So it's applied in a lot of different areas across the city. Mine Road is one of them that we're going to have to use this fund for, and it will support it. And this group that I told you about initially, the committee, they found that what was really required to support all of the known projects would have been an ERU equivalent somewhere in the mid-7 range. Mm-hmm. Well, what they knew was we don't want to be known for being the highest. We want to be known for being kind of in the middle or lower tier. So they brought it down into the 4.75 range. When you apply that to a lot of the properties in town, I think what you'll find is, I might start a debate with a few, but businesses typically on Main Street, this is de minimis. The properties that you would think you would hear from might be people that own vacant property like Kmart, or new developers coming in wanting to repurpose those properties, but that's not typically what we're hearing. And new construction, they design out of this because the new requirements for impounding water allows you to pretty much meet these requirements and hit the 85% point from day one based on new design requirements that didn't exist 50 years ago.
And actually, those are about 30% they design out of for the requirements for stormwater detention and water quality, actually, for the most part.
Okay, thank you,
Weren't
Jeff.
we above the average, though? Because I went back and watched the meeting from 2015, 2016, and it was actually reported by the person up down the podium that the 4.75 was above the state average of 3-something.
And you'll find out as at that time.
At that time.
If you look at it now, and I have a slide in here that discusses that, we're actually below the median point now.
So Mayor, maybe this is a good time for questions. We can break, have some brief questions off the, I'm done pontificating a little bit.
Okay. Sorry.
What I want you all to know is that this has the potential of impacting a lot of people. If the fee is adjusted to reduce collections, the first biggest project off the books will be Cow Creek. And Cow Creek is a project where FEMA last year threw an additional 100-plus properties into the floodplain that didn't previously exist. Why does this happen? Well, sedimentation, impediment to stream flow, all these things, additional concrete being constructed that we don't know about, or sometimes we do know about. That is happening, and Cow Creek project in the future stands to give relief almost predominantly to LMI families. Not people in my neighborhood, but people that are already dealing with flooding issues and they're getting worse in their existing neighborhoods. So with that said.
Haven't we been having reserves? We've been getting more into our fund than we've spent out of it.
To date,
Since-
we have, you're correct.
To date. We have been collecting and collecting and collecting and reserving.
But you'll find out we actually have more
Yeah.
projects than we have money
Sarah,
still
hang on
going
to phase
forward.
2 of that conversation. You're going to love this, or hate it. I'm not sure which. But it may make more sense as this conversation goes on. I'll step back. Take it away. Thank you very much.
He did a pretty good summary in a very short time of what I have a little bit more information on, but I guess we'll just jump in and get started. So today.
Could I ask one background question?
Yeah.
What were we doing before the stormwater utility fee to get these things accomplished?
To my knowledge, you were using specials and you were using unconventional debt mechanisms to cover that. I think some GO was typically
And
used.
$2 per property or something.
Actually, it was $1 per property for a long time. They upped it to $2 just for the very brief time in between the actual, the interim time before the ERU started. But what we did before is actually like if we were very reactive, and so if we needed to do a repair, people in the sanitary sewer side of things did the repairs for the storm sewer. So we had no personnel dedicated to do those types of things. We didn't have, we had a few unfunded mandates that came up, and we had to pay for levy certification and other types of things. But really, we didn't have a vehicle to do these types of projects. Essentially, we're putting Band-Aids on any repairs. We didn't really do any stormwater improvements in that period of time, just to keep up with what we had to do realistically. And Brian probably has some other things.
Thanks, Jeff. Just wanted to add one thing. In 2000, we did a stormwater master plan. And by 2014, when we started looking at this utility, we had done 0 projects, and 0 projects had been were in our CIP because we had no funding to do these large flood reduction projects. And so that was kind of the focus of this SWAC committee, the Stormwater Advisory Committee. They're very interested in creating a fee that allowed us to begin doing some large flood reduction projects.
Anyway, we'll keep going. That's just in a nutshell for a lot of these discussions that we have today. But I'll give you a little bit more of a history of the infrastructure. I will let you know a little bit more of the infrastructure we have, some of the history of the stormwater utility. You had some questions from January, your January meeting that we'll answer in this, and then we'll go through some of the present uses of the stormwater utility funds and some of the projects that we don't really know that they're going to come up. They just pop up on us. with respect to some failures throughout the city.
I
just
had one
because of-
question. When you transfer money out of the storm fund, that's because a certain is that linked to a certain percentage that was bonded for a stormwater?
We actually haven't, we don't really transfer it out of the stormwater fund.
Mhm.
We have an idea of what we're spending it on and a piece of the pie, so to speak,
Mhm.
of the funds that were going to those types of projects, and I'll talk about that here
Okay.
too. So, and then we'll go into the stormwater utility rate and how the rate change will impact any of the flood mitigation projects or the stormwater master plan type projects going forward. So, I know this is all important to it because they all tie together, but the city has about 5,000 inlets and manholes and 94 miles of pipe. Varies from 12 inches to 8 feet in diameter. And you can see this one is a corrugated metal pipe that is starting to get to the end of its useful life, and we'll have to do something with that at some point. We also have vitrified clay, PVC pipe also out there that in various stages of and different conditions. And we've been talking about bridges a little bit lately, but the city has 66 bridges, but 54 of them over stormwater facilities. The one on the right is one like we're going to be replacing on 11th Avenue very soon. It was built in 1930 with the corrugated metal pipes that are starting to fail too, that were added at some point later. So. We also have about 30 miles of ditches that we maintain throughout the community, and then 28 miles of levees that protect a large portion of the community. If we didn't have the levees, you can see on the left-hand side, the areas in blue would be what the flooding would be within that area, or what the 100-year floodplain would be. This protects the levee on the right, shows how it's protected, and it actually protects 14 square miles of the city, which there's a property value of a few years ago of $930 million, which is probably over $1 billion at this point. So all these stormwater facilities are things that need to be maintained and taken care of moving forward. When we talk about the stormwater system, here's just a little bit of information about that. The green, yellow, and the red indicated on the map are all some of the storm sewer pipes within the community. The red represents the storm sewer pipes that are over 50 years old. And then over 50% of our storm sewer is actually over 50 years old, and we're starting to realize it requires more and more repairs as we get through televising and identifying the problems that we have.
Is the lifespan typically 50 years?
That goes on the next slide.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So yes, I missed. Yeah, really the average life expectancy of some of our stormwater infrastructure facilities, piping and those types of things, is roughly about 50 years. This was actually completed a couple of years ago, so we're probably in the 60% range or more of that's over 50 years old. And we have some that are over 75 years old, and there's a couple projects that I'll bring up later that indicate, just show you that we're working on something that was built in 1910 or 1930, somewhere in those types of ranges that we're starting to need to either replace or something catastrophic will be happening. So how did we get here? Jeff mentioned that we had quite a few number of items that came up and then started this, what we needed for stormwater utility or to upgrade it so we can actually do some work. We had some flood events in 2007 and 2013, and those were estimated to be 100 to 500 year type events in the community, and it did show that there's numerous areas in the community that experienced flooding during that time period. We also have our MS4 permit, or Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System permit for stormwater, that was issued in 2005, and then we were audited in 2009. The results of the audit, we had to get caught up on a number of our ordinances, but it also said that you have to have one person dedicated to maintaining and taking care of what's needed for administering that permit going forward. So we have a report that's due each year to KDHE for that type of, for our stormwater permit. Again, in 2009, we started levee certification, which came about sometime after Hurricane Katrina. All the levees were down in the New Orleans area. A lot of them were breached, so FEMA started an effort to have all levees certified throughout the United States, and that was an unfunded mandate to try to make sure those were up to where they needed to be and their conditions actually protect the properties that they say they do. So we went through that effort and completed that, and actually our stormwater fee from before, the minimal one, paid for a big portion of that. However, we did have some improvements that had to be done that we did bond, and we're still paying the bonds for those at this point. So again, I talked about aging infrastructure and beginning to show its age, and showing more repairs that are needed and replacements, as well as what Brian had indicated, a master plan that was prepared in 2000 that we never really ever completed any projects going forward. So essentially we were kicking the can down the street, and we didn't have any personnel to work on the stormwater system and just being reactive to problems, and many of those were getting paid for out of other utilities at that time. So the goals of it were of the stormwater utility study that the council authorized in late 2013 were to identify funding for capital improvement projects. These are both the stormwater infrastructure maintenance type projects and the flood reduction projects, as well as to continue to meet the requirements of administering our stormwater permit with KDHE. It also wanted to dedicate some funds to operation and maintenance internally, so we would dedicate personnel actually for stormwater repairs. So we'd have a way to keep up with those instead of just being quite as reactionary. So what we did, and Jeff had noted, we did involve some key stakeholders to guide and assist the project team to establish overall stormwater management program goals, and to also develop affordable level of service for the stormwater management program. And I'll talk about level of service coming up in a little bit too. This was one of the slides that was used when we initiated the Stormwater Advisory Committee, or the SWAC committee. It's just to assist the city with the selection of a consensus-based level of service for stormwater management and an appropriate funding mechanism to maintain regulatory compliance and meet the expectations of its citizens. Here's what some of the membership was with respect to the Stormwater Advisory Committee. This group actually met in 6 meetings throughout 2014 and digested the information concerning the stormwater utility and our stormwater system. From that information, they also learned that we wanted to dedicate some personnel to being able to maintain and repair infrastructure, as well as continue to maintain compliance with our stormwater permit. They really just helped determine what the utility would look like going forward. So they did compile and put those recommendations out in a meeting in January of 2015. But they also considered what would be the most equitable way and fair way for the stormwater utility to be funded. They considered a number of these things, but property taxes, which really isn't related always to what the service is provided, sales taxes not really also related to the service provided, and they settled on an ERU-based stormwater utility fee, which is more related to the service provided by the city, or ERU, which is equivalent residential unit, or the actual impervious area that's generally found on the average residential property. And then they applied that over the whole system. When they submitted their recommendations, they said that, and this was what was submitted in January of 2015, that the city should strive for level of service B over the next 5 years. The stormwater program should be funded by a user fee for an existing program and improvements to it. The stormwater program should be funded at a rate structure based on impervious area, and that impervious area should be 3,120 square feet. was about 1,000 properties that were averaged to find the average size, which that's what it is for the city here. Other communities use different ERU numbers. The residential fee should be based on just one billing unit, one ERU for each residence or each residential property. Again, the fee for duplexes, multifamily apartments, mobile homes should be one billing unit. The rate structure for non-residential and commercial customers should be based on the actual impervious area divided by the ERU. Exempted properties should be public roads, undeveloped properties, greenways, railroad tracks, and properties with impervious areas of less than 300 square feet. And the rate structure should also authorize credits to be defined during the implementation of the stormwater utility. And this was the important one. They wanted to have a flooding CIP or based on our stormwater master plan that could systematically complete projects as we go and with a mixture of bonding and pay-as-you-go funding. So that's one of the key things that they wanted to move forward with at that time. The SWAC was willing to continue during the implementation of this program, and they did for a couple of years as we were trying to get some grant funding from FEMA, but we didn't end up getting, but they did kind of maintain the group for a couple of years during that time. A number of those people are now retired and different things, but there's a number of them that are still around. And then the recommended rate to start the program should be $4.75 per ERU, which they initially thought would raise between $2.4 and $2.5 million per year, but in reality, we generally get $2.1 to $2.2 million per year.
Is that because people were successful in credits on the credit side?
Oh, there's probably a little bit of that, and essentially they just estimated that going forward.
Oh, okay.
So it's more based. I mean, they didn't know exactly how much because we didn't measure out every property except the properties that were the non-residential properties for the ERU base. So it was a good estimate. I mean, a pretty good estimate, but it is a little bit less than they had estimated to start out with. And this is a very hard slide to see, but prior to essentially 2016, when this was initiated, the city's program was ranked per our level of service. And you can see it was actually level of service D or D minus at the time because we had really just reactionary or complaint-based repairs to the system. We didn't really have we had a long-term plan, but we hadn't did any projects. We have some levee maintenance issues, and we've been able to handle those somewhat, but really it was just kicking the can down the road. Future people would have to be paying for those improvements. What they wanted us to try to achieve is level of service B, which was more proactive planning and systematic CIP planning, a mixture of routine and inspection-based maintenance, a short-term plan for priority projects or CIP essentially, and we tried to do some other projects, one per year. But they didn't really know what those costs would be, and Jeff had indicated, let you know that roughly it was about $3.6 million per year what they had estimated to maintain that level of service. And again, for doing the projects, the flooding CIP and those types of things, they thought that was too much, so they settled on half of the CIP costs. So we came to a $475 dollars per ERU for the stormwater utility. So that just kind of goes through what the stormwater ERU is. And for instance, just an example, a building and some parking that has a 90,360 square feet of impervious area, divide that by the 3,120 square feet, which is an ERU, equals 3 ERUs. You multiply that times 3 and you get your average monthly for the non-residential customers.
Another reason to reduce parking.
So here's, Sarah, here's the slide that deals with the actual rate comparisons right now. I believe like McPherson wasn't in that mix the first time back in 2000. Theirs came about sometime after ours. And we calculated all these back so they are representative of the same ERU we have. McPherson's is actually $7 per their ERU, but their ERU is a different size than ours, so we just calculate it back so it makes the same sense as what ours is. So they're actually
I
apples
still
to
think
apples.
ours needs to be lower though. I mean, we're not Lawrence, we're not Manhattan.
But if you look at Ottawa or Garden City or McPherson. just
Ottawa's a
down-
little lower than ours, no, but Wichita's lower.
Well,
Hayes
Wichita
is
has quite a
lower.
larger population base
Yeah.
also, so.
And I believe one of those cities that I see right there has an augmented funding mechanism where they actually use the specials and,
There might some that have stormwater impact fees. There's other
Yeah.
vehicles to be able to do these things too.
I won't call them out, but I think there is one that's there doing that.
So one of the questions back in January was their credits, and that was noted in the information that was presented to the city council at the time. But yes, there is. Items 1 and 2 are actually requirements, or the top two items, volume control and quality control on site, water quality control on site, are actually requirements for new developments now. Actually, volume control has been required for quite a number of years before we had anything to do with the stormwater utility. But that means they typically have detention and meter the water out at the same rate as they did prior to any development on that property. Water quality control is required by our stormwater permit, our NPDES permit from KDHE that we have to do on all new developments, 1 acre or greater. So you would get a credit for that on the new developments. And then we have some others in there. One, a regional volume control. So if there was a large development, they potentially could get up to 50% credit, only for the fact that if they're taking on water from other portions of the city and handling at least 50 acre feet, they could get a credit. We haven't had anybody get that one yet, but there's been talk with the fairgrounds that that's a potential going forward. They could get a credit by allowing a regional stormwater facility on that, or regional detention. Again, and we do have some permit holders that actually hold NPDES stormwater permits or NPDES industrial permits. So there's a few permit holders that actually get credits on their stormwater fees. We don't have anyone as of yet that has done the education credit, but that's more, long as the outreach and education is approved by us and it meets our stormwater permit requirements, then they could get a credit. And we do have some of the zero discharge ones where private systems either retain all of the stormwater on site or have an outfall outside the city's city limits or into essentially K61 or some other area that's not controlled by the city. So we have a number of those too. Then there was a question on what properties are exempt from the stormwater utility fee. Again, undeveloped properties, railroad tracks, public airports, runways, and public roadways. So what that means is really all entities are billed for this stormwater utility fee. And there's one thing I was going to make sure I said, but so including federal, state, and city-owned properties, the city actually applies this to our own facilities also. So the post office, churches, the state fair, and other city properties. So now we're getting into the funding portion. This is essentially the pie of the $2.1 million to $2.2 million. 1.1 million, of course, goes to flood reduction projects, 375,000 to in-house operation and maintenance, contracted projects, it's about 425,000 per year, and overhead allocation, it's money that goes back into the general fund to support City Hall and utility billing type services. and then also our permit compliance or administration of that. So we're going to go into some of the projects and how this is all used.
How
within the
much
city.
cash reserve do we, because I know we had like $5.5 million in the end of 2020. What is that now?
We're probably still at that right
The
now.
$5.5 million?
Plus or minus, yes.
What's the cost of the Cow Creek project?
Right now, we've had some scope creep on that one, just because we've had to do some of the bridges south of Avenue G, and we've been working with the railroads. But right now, to do the whole project, though there's some value engineering we can do going forward, but they've estimated about almost $20 million for that portion at this point. So
Mine Road alone will be close to $2 million.
very well could be.
Huh?
Mine Road,
would-
Hutch Salt, that issue we're trying to solve, that'll be a couple $1 million.
And then we have another one coming forward pretty soon too.
It's 20 million, but what is the how many steps and years are we talking about for the 20 million? Yeah. How
About,
many phases?
we have it funded over about 5 years, but originally when they developed this stormwater utility fee, they were hoping to spend about $22.5 million every 25 years, plus or minus, so we could still have a little bit of a reserve going forward for those things that come up unexpectedly, Mine Road or some of those types of things. So essentially, this might be our only project we do in 20 years going forward, if we keep things at the same. So Brian's going to talk a little bit about in-house services. I'm going to get a drink of water and then come back.
All right, so I wanted to just talk a little bit about our operation and maintenance activities that are done by our in-house staff. So the stormwater utility revenue funds those services. And this is numbers from our 2022 budget. So roughly $200,000 goes to pay for 4 of our stormwater maintenance workers. We've got about $100,000 in there for materials, fuel, track hoe rental, equipment repairs. And then another almost $60,000 is annually allocated to fund our equipment replacement. It's our municipal equipment reserve fund, that MRF. And so just to kind of share with you what equipment has been purchased thus far using the stormwater utility funds, I'm going to talk about the combination sewer cleaner, what we call our Vector truck. So that is staffed by a 2-person crew and assigned to go and clean the storm sewer and storm sewer inlets. Then we got a crew truck and a mini excavator. That is another 2-person construction crew that goes out and makes repairs to failing infrastructure. We also have a pickup truck, a 1/2-ton 4x4, and that is dedicated to our stormwater management coordinator, which is actually housed in the engineering department and oversees the NPDES permit that we have through the state of Kansas. Then we got 2 street sweepers. Those 2 street sweepers are funded 50% by the stormwater utility and 50% by the general fund. It comes out of our street division budget. Staff from the street division actually operates that, so no staff from the stormwater fund are staffing that. And then the last piece of equipment is what we call our CCTV van, closed circuit television inspection van. So this has a camera that we stick into the storm sewer pipe, and they're able to track that through the pipe, inspect the pipe, and identify if the pipe's ready to fail, and it allows us to go in and proactively repair that pipe. So that is funded by 30% out of the stormwater fee, 70% out of our wastewater fee. And then we've got 2 sanitary sewer maintenance workers that staff that. So no stormwater maintenance workers are actually working on that particular truck. So somewhat subsidized by our wastewater fees for the television inspection of our storm sewer system. So all in total, about $750,000 have come out of the stormwater utility fund to purchase the equipment that we use to maintain the system that we've got. So I like to break our operation and maintenance work up into reactive work and then proactive work. So reactive work consists of, that's a storm sewer. It's plugged with all kinds of debris, including it looks like a concrete brick got in there somehow. So again, that Vector truck would be the piece of equipment that we would use to jet that out and suck up that debris and then haul that off. We're also, those maintenance workers go out and they'll clean debris from the inlets themselves. So especially when there's leaves and sticks that fall on the streets and we get a rain event, oftentimes those will carry to the curb inlets, plug those, and then you have some street flooding in those areas. So we go and we remove that stuff. Those workers do. Then, of course, fixing pipe failures, and you can see a box that had failed. Our storm sewer maintenance staff are the ones that made that repair. And then, of course, levee patrols during major flood events. This is a picture of Levee A, which is out on the west side of town. That's from the 2019 May flood.
Wow.
And our storm sewer maintenance staff work with our street division staff to monitor that levee on a 24-hour basis when it's loaded underwater like that, doing inspections and repairs as needed. And then some of our proactive work. So in-house proactive work. So cleaning the storm sewer system on a regular basis. So they're out there cleaning that hopefully before we get those plugs. And again, you can see one of our workers there working with that Vector truck. The Fourth and Duffy project is a great example of a proactive project that our crews assisted with. So this is a before and after picture at a similar rain event. And so what this project consisted of was cleaning the ditches, cleaning out some of that silt buildup, and replacing a whole bunch of culverts in that area so that that area could drain better. And you can see it's made a huge difference for that particular area of our community. Another, just an example of a project that our guys will do on a proactive basis. This is an inlet at the top there that's in front of the Yes Way on West 30th Avenue, somewhat close to Hendricks. So that used to be a hole where a pipe dead-ended into a hole that was probably about 4 feet deep. And I'm aware of at least one time a car had driven into that when it was fully loaded. It looked like a puddle, and it wasn't. It was a hole filled with water. So our crews went in and built an inlet over that hole so that it was a much safer area for our community. And with that, I think Jess probably had a chance to get a drink of water.
Yep. Just to actually continue on this, the administration of our NPDS stormwater discharge permit costs about $100,000 per year. It funds the salary of our stormwater management coordinator, and our permit has 6 minimum control measures, which includes education outreach, public involvement, construction site runoff inspection, illicit discharge detection and elimination, post-construction BMPs, and pollution prevention and good housekeeping. We also actually have to go out and sample 4 or 5 times a year during stormwater events out of Cow Creek and the Arkansas River to do stormwater sampling just to see what contaminants, or if the contaminants are raised as they go through the city of Hutchinson. So, and now back to more of the projects. Again, $425,000 a year is used for really operation and maintenance type projects. Before 2017, we didn't do any of these types of projects because we didn't have any funding. And we had a list that had been growing for 25 years that had about 300 and, I don't know how many people? About 325 people on it, where they have complained about water standing in the streets and those types of things. We sent out a standard letter at that time that just says, thanks, we'll put you on the list, but we can't promise you when anything will get done. So now we're actually being a little bit more proactive and able to do these when our street projects are in those areas, like the arterial and the residential street projects. So we're eliminating standing water in the street and drainage throughout the community. We've been using the remaining $325,000 a year for the last number of years also, and we've completed about almost $3 million worth of projects to date. We have a number of projects coming up for the next year also. But that just kind of shows you where we're at with some of this and some of the improvements in certain areas that we've done in the last year or so. This year, we've talked about the Mine Road box culvert, which there's preliminary estimates are about $2 million. And then we're also doing some culvert replacement in the Farmington Park area. Those are the pictures that are on the left side of the picture where we're having some settling, and the bottom of the corrugated metal pipes are actually not existent anymore, those types of things, and the road's starting to be impacted there also. So both of these, the road at the locations are where they're having problems. If we continue and don't do any work on these, well, at some point we'll have to close those roads. The Farmington Park area, the main one right now is, I believe, under North Walnut Street and Farmington Park is where we're having quite a bit of problems going forward, and that's going to be bid in the near future. Here's another one that we've been keeping an eye on. It's the Sand Hills Diversion Box, or the Warren Street Box Culvert. This is located under the street that goes adjacent to Rice Park and empties out into Cow Creek south of there. This location, this project was actually built in 1935 and partially repaired in 1989. But we had a condition assessment completed last year, and they said, you guys better start at least thinking about replacing this portion or the whole box going forward. It's about 5,000 feet long. The portion under Swearin Street is about 2,500 feet long. We'd have to do that in phases over the next number of years. We've been trying to space that out and figure that out within the stormwater budget. So this is one that's going to be coming up. Again, this just indicates the flood reduction projects of about $1 million per year. The Cow Creek area, those types of projects. Again, when the stormwater utility was approved, they expected that we could fund about $22.5 million over 25 years of these types of projects. One more, just showing a little bit that we have the railroad bridges to the south. And then here's one that came up just last year. This is kind of a dual purpose project going forward on Superior Street. It's both a stormwater maintenance type project, but it's also a flood reduction project. It was identified in our stormwater master plan that we completed, which we did update the stormwater master plan, and at that point we have identified about $89 million worth of improvements from 2018, which those prices aren't probably valid anymore and have went up. But this is an area where we had a water main break. Adjacent to the water main was the stormwater box that was constructed in 1910 to 1920, sometime in that range, and the sides of the box are beginning to just crumble out, and so we're worried that it's just going to collapse and we'll have a catastrophic failure. So when we want to try to put that back, we'd like to upsize it so it's ready for the stormwater and can help the stormwater flooding in that area. And again, now we also have the $180,000 a year that goes to the overhead allocation that goes to the general fund to support utility fund and city hall operations. So we started looking at the utility rates, and Angela and I have went through those a number of times, trying to fit these things in going forward, what our projects cost versus our maintenance costs versus our maintenance type projects. So we wanted to continue to keep it equitable, and we looked at a couple of, well, one option keeping it the same, but that's kind of the impetus going forward. This is right now, as we're sitting right now, we have a number of projects, and you can see the stormwater maintenance projects are located up on the top. The flood control projects are located on the bottom. Mine Road is included in there for 2022, along with Farmington and Lorraine, ditches and park in that area. So with that, we had to spread out the Cow Creek channel expansion also on the flood reduction projects. And we've included Star Street, Superior Street. The lines through the other ones are ones that we couldn't fit into the 5-year CIP. The Sandhill Diversion Box, the Sworn Street one, and Fairgrounds Detention going forward, and another phase of the Star Street. So this is using our current funding. And I'll have Angela come up pretty soon here, or she can come up now.
So what that means, is we would start 2022, we did start 2022 with 5.7 million in our stormwater utility fund. We've broken down the expenditures between the stormwater maintenance and the flood reduction, and we've done our best to predict or estimate the project costs and our operating costs going forward. You can see in 2022, our total expenditures would be just over 2 million. But by the end of 2027, we have the same revenues of 2.1 million, and our expenditures are 2.3 million. So at that point, we would not be able to take on any additional cash projects. We're depleting our cash that we have in that fund, or using what we have to cash fund some projects like the Mine Street and probably the Phase A of Cow Creek, that utility relocation. We would pay cash for that and bond some of the remaining projects. And so this is where we would end up with option one. Another option we looked at is reducing the stormwater fee to $3.52 a month per ERU. So that would be able to fund these projects listed. So what we have done is it would majorly delay or eliminate C and D phases of Cow Creek. We would not be able to do any of the Star Street, Superior Street project in addition to that. And again, the fairground detention pond would not be able to be completed as well. With that, we would start reducing the ERU in 2023, and by the end of 2027, we would have 1.4 million in the fund. We would then at that time quit funding any flood reduction projects. You can see there that we were transferring $1 million to $750,000 a year to cash fund some of those flood reduction projects. We would have to eliminate that entirely after 2027. So those are the options we looked at. There's probably some area in between there where we could compromise. So I'll open that up for questions now.
Do you have anything to bring up?
Well, I would say that it's subjective of what you cut and what you don't cut.
Well,
as far as Cow Creek and what you've put in there. I
Well,
mean, I'm saying
but-
cutting Cow Creek's obviously going to give us a big no, now we don't get
but
the
actually,
flooding that
we
it-
did it for a reason,
Getting.
Sarah. It's not
Yeah.
what you think it is. It's more so
Mhm.
we actually continue to maintain to have some maintenance
Yeah.
funds going forward. Because if we use all of our,
Mhm.
I mean, that's what
So
we
give
want
us-
to. We want to take care of our existing infrastructure moving forward. That's kind of our focus on if things would actually be cut. So yes, but what else? I mean, we
Yeah.
couldn't do any of those types of projects unless you want us not to maintain the system as it is now.
What is the amount that you're getting? You have 2.2 million that you're getting now, and what would it be under the 3.53?
1.6 million, if you look up on the revenue
So it'd be
portion.
1.6 million.
$560,000 a year difference.
So,
And you're saying the maintenance costs run about
so that's $500,000 over the next
But it's a
5
$500,000 we
years.
couldn't bond.
That's only $3 million that you've cut, and all of a sudden you can't do a $20 million project
Yeah, it is.
because of $3 million that you're cutting.
Yep.
Why? Explain that to me.
That's more.
Well, because most of that project would be bonded, so
It's $3 million over 5 years. It's only a little over $500,000 a year based off that fee reduction. That does not equate into what you've not being able to do.
It's the bond payments.
capacity
the
to
bond
bond.
payment.
Yeah, I
Yes, we
get
would-
that.
You would still be able to do phase A and B of Cow Creek.
Mhm.
I mean, all of this is based on priorities. What do you want to
Yeah.
do versus what do you not want to do? What level of service are you willing to provide?
Thank you. That's
So
exactly
if
what
we
I was
don't,
saying.
if
So
we
it's
don't
subjective.
do those, then it
Mhm.
we don't have those bond
Yeah.
payments. So it's more
Mhm.
than just looking at how much you're reducing it, that fee for 5 years. You're looking at the next 20 years. Are you going to reduce it for 20 years, or are we just doing a temporary decrease? It would go back to that as well.
Yes, but what I'm saying is kind of subjective. We could probably still do some form of reduction and still keep the Cow Creek project. You just have to get a little bit creative, because you're only
Not the
reducing it by
entire-
0.6, less than $1 million a year, 0.6,
You
little
wouldn't-
over $500,000.
Yeah, you
right?
could not.
An intake.
I don't see a feasible way to do Cow Creek in its entirety, the 20
Mhm.
million, and reduce
In
it.
the 5 years. But could we do it in 8 years?
You could start you could start phase C and D in 20 years after we've paid off like phase B and done some of the other flood reduction projects. So you could wait 20 years and then do the rest of Cow Creek. But you're going to have those bond payments for the next 20 years.
Or we can find other funding mechanisms,
you
like
could use the general fund. You could use
use the general
obligation
fund to
debt.
keep up, so we're not having such a high fee. We could, talk about the zoo and and the
If-
amount of money that we spend on the zoo. We spend money other places. I don't think we need a high fee, and I honestly don't think that the 0.6 million a year reduction would stop us from finding a way to still do Cow Creek.
One thing to
It's
consider with
misrepresentation. I think you're just trying for the shock and awe, and I still think it.
one thing you have to consider is if you do decide to fund part of or all of Cow Creek as just general obligation debt, it will hurt our bond rating.
Mhm.
We will look at almost maxing out the total amount of debt that we can take legally.
Yeah.
So it will hurt us. We will pay a higher interest rate because of our lower rating. Whereas if we bond it and we can show Moody's, who does our rating, that we're
Mhm.
going to use stormwater fees to pay that debt, it won't hurt our rating. So we do have to weigh the pros and cons.
Yeah, but we could
Mhm.
also fund using a fee, fund Cow Creek, and use other things to fund some of that other stuff that's up there.
I think it's robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Yeah, it's robbing Peter to pay Paul, but in order to get a better Moody rating for your interest,
Wait,
that can be done. I mean, people
well,
do
I
it in
mean-
finance all the time. You just,
Are you
I'm-
gonna
Move it
bond Cow
I'm just
Creek
saying it's
or
not that
Mine
much of a
Road?
reduction.
I'm curious, what is the feel of the council as far as service level? Would you like to see a lower service level in our stormwater system? Or would you, what are your goals here? We need some consensus because
First of all, Brian, are you fully staffed up there now?
We have, excuse me, we have positions in the budget, but no, we're not fully staffed.
So how
We've
many-
got vacancies.
How many down in the stormwater?
We've got 4 budgeted positions. We're down 2 of those positions.
For me, I worked at the city for 20, 30 years, and these guys do a remarkable job. I haven't, used to be one critic of this stormwater thing, talking to customers. I had one customer tell me, I pay for the water going in and I pay for the water going out, But these guys do a good job, and when I'm sitting here thinking, I'm looking at all this, till we get more information on this, we need this. Or when I used to work traffic control, I'd dig by these culverts and they're just rusted out. Water's going into them and it's just terrible. It's just actually terrible. I was the one that were promoted. I thought about we spending too much money on the stormwater, but after my experience with the city and seeing this, I think we can't afford to reduce it. I mean, the $4.75 per ERUs, whatever you call it, we can't decide this in one day like this. It's very important that we keep our infrastructure going the way it is and keep it up. You guys probably are behind, am I right? You're probably behind on repairs, or you up
Well,
with the repairs?
we continue to get behind. I mean, the one Superior Street one just showed up last fall, actually, so we haven't known about it, and I'm potentially, we're gonna have more of those continue to show up just because of the age of our infrastructure, Steve.
So now that you're getting behind, and the employees that you're behind, it just adds to the problem, am I right? Just keeps adding to the problem, right? I mean, you're getting
it
less
could.
and less done, right?
Yeah, and the projects are actually getting bigger on the maintenance side of things. Like I said, the Superior Street area, since that's one that actually does need to be replaced pretty quickly.
Well, for me to sit here and tell you guys we need to cut you is ridiculous.
We're not cutting them. I'm just saying
Or
we don't need, we can adjust our budget, which me being more conservative, to fund these things like we're supposed to without having a massive fee that everybody else has to pay. We get taxpayer dollars, we get taxpayer money. We just have to be more conscientious of what we spend our money on, and whether
There's no
that's
doubt.
a 2% cut across the board on all expenses, or a reduction in our parks and recreation so that we can fund this. But we shouldn't have this big fee. We need to it
I
needs to be
understand.
done, and our infrastructure has been neglected, yeah. But we can't just pump this big fat fee, especially when some of the areas are, I'm not saying we need to get rid of it completely. I'm saying we need to adjust it.
What are
And
your
I'm not
thoughts,
just the rate.
John
We could keep the rate
and
at 475, but can we adjust how the EUs are calculated for larger properties? Can we get creative on certain things? That's what I'm asking for.
John and Greg, I know both of you were interested in this presentation and asked the staff to put it together, so I'm curious what your thoughts are.
The reason for me wanting to take a look at this was how it affected property owners like myself that have industrial properties, and it was a huge hit to the profit of my business. I understand what we're using it for. I guess it still boggles my mind on how did we ever, I mean, you say we never fixed a curb before, but.
Well, we fix curves, but not for the drainage type issues.
Well, isn't that what a curb does?
It does, but I mean, it's more ones that are broken, not ones that are
Okay.
just necessarily settled.
I guess I'm just still trying to wrap my head around, how did we get to this point? It seemed like a huge jump right at first for those of us that have businesses. And it was very concerning to me. You've made definitely a case for where this money's going, why it's being used for what it's being used for. And I definitely appreciate that. And it seems pretty equitable when you're using ERUs to determine how a business is charged versus how a homeowner is charged. I don't know if that answers your question, Jade, but that's why I
Yeah.
brought it up.
Yeah.
And I still hear about it.
I think the issue was that we did so little for so long that when we did what was needed at even kind of a medium level, it seemed shocking.
And they wanted a continuous dedicated fund going to it instead of the whims of budgets each year, I think. That's kind of, we're tight on the budget, it's a dry year. Let's just not think about it this year. Or the next year, then we have a large rainfall event and we're not any further down the road, those types of issues. So just so that there's a constant funding of the stormwater utilities, so these things can have a priority going forward and aren't able just to be shoved underneath the rug for a year or two, you know what I mean? Because doing that doesn't get us any further than we are now. So
I do want to have forward thinking. John, you're not saying anything.
I'd like to digest on this a little bit more.
Oh, of course. I mean, I don't think we're going to make any decision today, but there is definitely understanding on my part why it's there.
I would like more options and discussions about how it can be manipulated differently.
Well, ultimately, it's really what you want as income per year. That's what it comes down. We can do whatever you want on manipulating everything, but
Yeah.
But
I think
really, it comes down on to what you think is warranted for the maintenance and the level of service for the stormwater utility, is the way I see it too.
I think the pain point is the properties that are larger properties that are older and weren't able to take advantage of the development to work around some of these things. I think those are the biggest pain points.
I agree. And when we were implementing this, we did have a number of people come in and talk to us and phone calls and those types of things. It wasn't always pleasant either for us going through this. So we do still have people that call in and ask about how things are calculated, and we go through those each year if someone wants that information. Sometimes things are able to be reduced because they are doing something different on their property and those types of things. But there is a way that people can address those types of things going forward. If things are the same, though, they'll stay the same on those properties. So, but you're all right. Those are a question on those existing properties.
The only thing that bothers me, you said when this got started, this was an estimated cost. Is that right? You guys, when we started this years and years ago, it was an estimate.
What do you mean, like an estimate?
That $4.75 was just an estimate, right?
No, that was the fee that was implemented.
That was the
It's
rate
just-
that was implemented. That wasn't an estimated. What was estimated was what the income would be.
Okay.
Based on that.
Based on that $4.75 as what they could do before we even started billing anybody.
Or we are implementing this and charging this based on water bill. Is that correct?
No, actually, no. It's based on impervious area. It's on the water bill. Yeah, it's included in your water or sewer bill. But there are
city water,
there are about 196 properties that are billed that don't have water or sewer.
but they are billed.
That are billed, and it could be such as a business that has the store on one property and the parking on another property. So the parking area may not have. I mean, as simple as that. Or there's other situations.
Like
out there.
Atrium, are they being charged? Stormwater utility, they don't
Yeah.
have utilities, but they're still being charged.
Yeah, they would be charged.
And Kmart, when it rent, that property was
Correct.
empty for, yeah,
Yep.
okay.
So there is ones that actually are charged that don't have water or sewer bills.
I don't have any more questions. I got a lot of things to think about, though.
Sorry, guys, it gets deep. It's got a lot of levers in it. Yeah.
I just think at some point, we have to be responsible on our budget to make sure stuff is actually getting budgeted for and not having such a steep fee on some of these larger properties, especially.
Or like approving an $800,000 increase over a budgeted item earlier today. I mean, so I think that we're talking out of both sides of our mouth here. It's really about this being an unpopular thing, and it is an unpopular thing.
I know it's an unpopular thing, or we could talk about the 1% for art that maybe people just don't like hearing, and there's lots of ways around it. But you can also, you put it into the budget and you approve it. I mean, we could talk about a lot of things we can talk about where you're talking one ear and not the other, okay? But the fire station, we approved it at 4.5, so we already knew it was gonna be bigger and more than our other stations. And then there was some room for inflation. That is what happened, because it's at the fairgrounds, it's a big station. And these are our core service firefighters who have to deal with cancer and stuff. I think that is also like we need to fund our stormwater. It's also something that I consider core services. I just don't think we need to fund it completely through a high fee.
I don't see a path forward through the general fund without egregious
making
cuts
big-
to
yeah.
quality of life services.
Exactly. We would have to make egregious cuts to quality of life
I
service,
mean,
and I
you
think
might
that's
have
what
to
we should
cut
do.
streets then too. I
Yeah,
mean,
we probably have to
there's a lot
cut
of
streets,
there's a
too.
lot of
Mhm.
moving items in this whole discussion. So.
I know that some of the things that we've done here today is try to protect businesses with, the planning department's thoughts and recommendations. And I guess maybe to answer your question further, that's what I was thinking of when I said we need to reduce this fee. And maybe we need to reduce it on businesses and increase it on the residents. I don't know that. I'm not saying, it's, again, we're back to robbing Peter to pay Paul. So I'm just trying to let everyone get into my head a little bit on what my issues were with it.
A mechanism in this fund for some of these, because really, I'm going to go back to John here. Really, the biggest problem is people that had the older properties that don't have the means to get to zero.
Well, I don't think anyone's going to get to zero.
Well,
So-
But
the
the 30%
85%,
reduction
or, you know, when you have the newer properties that put these in. Is there a mechanism for these older properties to leverage some of the stormwater utility funds on their current properties so that they can pay less going forward? That we can work in partnership with some of these older properties in our community?
As it's set up now, there is not, unless they have some of the, some type of detention or some other types of facilities on their property.
Because if we want,
I think they
we
can
could
reduce
utilize-
impervious.
Well,
Right?
hold on,
I mean,
Mark.
they can reduce,
impervious, that's,
yeah. So old concrete that's busted up and should have been removed 30 years ago, go ahead and take that out. That'll change your quotient.
yeah.
yeah, you would get it, you're correct, you would
But
get
if
a
we
reduction
talk
at
to
that.
some of these previous owners in our community and use some of our resources and fund balance to help with removing some impervious structures, that's gonna help the stormwater utility fee. Partnering with some of the private companies to put in retention ponds and stuff that we might not have on private, helping them, that's gonna relieve some pressure on our stormwater utility fees. I think we can get a little bit creative instead of just saying, this is what we did, and I'm sticking with it. I'm asking for you to get creative and see how we can relieve
We
the
actually
pressure.
really don't have the
on-
personnel to do any of those types of things at this point. We're just, we're limited in that with respect too, so.
Mhm.
Just to brainstorm a little bit, and I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but looking at an opportunity in regards to properties that have large detention ponds that are capable of handling more than what's on their own property, working out an agreement with a neighboring property that has a detention pond and you don't have the ability to do it.
We would review that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think there's an opportunity there, and I can think of some of the industrial properties that have large detention ponds that probably can handle more than what's on their property.
Well, a good example of this, and Jeff's doing this already, I don't think he understands exactly what you're asking. State Fair, we're kind of working that same thing right now. We're actually helping them come up with a conceptual design as to what that might look like for them
But,
to.
but at present, it doesn't fit into our actually 5-year plan at this
No.
point. Just so
Well,
you
that's
know,
true. I'm
those
thinking
types of things doesn't
so,
even fit in.
as an example, at the industrial park, there's a couple properties out there with large detention areas, large ponds. If an agreement was struck between property owners to allow water rights or water easement to drain into their detention area, could they approach you and say, I have an agreement with my neighbor, they can handle all of this detention water, can I get some credits on this?
We could probably work something out that way. Right now, we don't, at least our credit policy doesn't really take that into account at this point.
I like it though. It's kind of like a carbon credit exchange.
Similar idea.
Yeah. To
But
help
there,
them.
it'd be limited to a few properties.
Yeah.
Right, it wouldn't be it'd be a handful.
Right.
Because the goal isn't to fee or to charge a business for revenue. It's you're really trying to minimize the impervious area. Like if they could get rid of impervious area, which is why, again, we need less parking, then they could reduce stormwater runoff issues. That's what we want.
It's keeping your stormwater to yourself.
Yeah.
Is the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Keep your stormwater to yourself.
But I think we need ways to be able to help these people that have the huge fee with existing infrastructure that are having, like, that's why the fairgrounds wants to put in a detention. And I think we need to help them regardless if it's up there or not. I think it needs to get done because that was a huge bill problem that caused a lot of
But there is still
issues between the huge bill that we started billing the state fair and then you had lobbyists up in Kansas City. Oh,
But they took
Hutchinson,
part,
you
they
know.
actually took part in
In the
helping us
SWAC.
set this,
Yeah,
actually.
they were on the
they
SWAC.
did. I know they did, but then they
And they
were.
knew what their bill was going to be before we started this process.
Yes.
They did.
But that didn't stop lobbyists from
But
trying to.
ultimately, there is a certain amount of revenue that you need to run your stormwater program, whatever that case may be.
Yeah.
The operation, the maintenance, the flood reduction projects, the maintenance projects that make up that stormwater program. And the one thing I would like to say is, the stormwater fee it's stormwater utility. It is a utility. It's just like our water utility. So you pay your water bill based on the amount of water that you use that particular month. And so that's how the stormwater utility is set up. It's based upon impervious area. So that means you're contributing more runoff into the storm sewer system that we have to maintain, and we have to build larger because of the amount of water that's being added to that system. So the way it's set up right now is fair, and it's equitable, and it's defensible in court. And so, whatever we do, we need to make sure that we continue that fair and equitable treatment of all of our users. So.
Thanks, Brian. In that vein, I would be opposed to transferring the burden onto residents. But what is the council's appetite for considering this at a later date? I mean, staff needs a little bit of direction here, I'm guessing.
We were going to assume that no action would be taken, and if it required further review, that it might be tabled and extended out, subject to maybe what the constituents are telling you all. Now that you have more information, you might understand your constituents better, and maybe go talk to some of the people that are still around that were on the original committee and probe them a little bit and ask them, why did you support that? Why? It helped me understand it quite a bit better.
So are we asking for a table of the discussion?
And just for the record, I'm not for adding an expense to anybody. So,
thanks, guys. Great discussion.
Okay, great.
Thanks for all the effort on this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it helped me a lot. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the next item.
Item 9, report of city officials.
Okay, we will start with you today, Sarah.
I don't have anything.
Do you have anything, John?
I'm good.
Okay, that'd be great.
Pass.
Okay, Steve?
Yes, I do have something to say this time. I like to see we have contractors inside the city that are getting some of our bids. I'd like to see that more, so we can give back to our people that live here and making a living. So that's a great thing to see. Other than that, that's all I have.
Okay. I just wanted to thank staff for their diligence in putting together such comprehensive information on the stormwater utility. I know that probably took a lot of effort, so appreciate that. And with that, I will pass it over to City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Atrium, we're going to start getting phone calls on that because it's quite an eyesore and it's ugly and I don't like it. It's got tall weeds and grass. So what we're going to do is send out a bunch of letters, put them on notice that something's got to take place, and I'm sure nothing will, and then we'll have to take enforcement action and be the big bad city and get involved with that. So that's probably coming down the road. So if you get calls from constituents on that, just let them know it's something that we're very mindful of. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to remind everyone that we do have a study session on ARPA this evening at 6:30, and for the public's knowledge, we have a joint meeting with the Hutch Rec Commission next Thursday, the 14th at 9 a.m. Both of those meetings are open to the public, and we encourage anyone who wants to attend those. So with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I would move that we adjourn.
Second.
Okay, please call the roll.
Garza?
Yes.
Bass?
Yes.
Bagwell?
Yes.
Richardson?
Yes.
Morris Dickert-Walsh.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.